Chapter 18. Good. Seeing Grey send Elise flying again, Viscount Fergus's eyes lit up. 3 months ago, when he brought Grey to the castle, he had arranged for 5 well-trained soldiers to fight with Grey. In the end, the victor was Grey. At that time, he felt that Grey's talent in battle was not bad. Now, seeing Grey send Alice, who was on par with him, flying twice in a row, he couldn't help but be even more certain of his previous guess. Grey did indeed have an extremely high talent for battle. Not only did he have a strong talent in cultivation, but he also had a very high talent in battle. He was very optimistic about Grey's future. Brother! The joy on Sarah's face could not be concealed. Since the beginning of the battle, her hands had been nervously moving in front of her. Now that she saw Grey clearly had the advantage, she immediately let out a sigh of relief. I didn't expect young Master Grey's talent in battle to be so strong. Lord Lynn's eyes were filled with surprise. Grey's talent in cultivation had already surprised him. He did not expect Grey's talent in battle to be so extraordinary as well. In his heart, he felt that his previous decision was right. Madame de Milan frowned slightly. Born in a baron's family, she did not have the opportunity to cultivate. However, from Elise's 2 defeats, she could see that the one who had the advantage was Grey. Bang! Landing on the ground, she felt a burning pain in her chest. At the same time, she felt her chest tighten. After a while, Elise crawled up from the ground. If not for the protection of his armor, he would have been injured. Thinking of this, his expression could not help but change. How can this guy be so much stronger than me? A cold light flashed in his eyes. In the next moment, a trace of blood energy flowed out from his heart and seeped into his legs. Whoosh! His figure quickly flashed out, moving faster than before. In the blink of an eye, he was already in front of Grey. Chi! A trace of blood energy also seeped into his right hand, causing the skin on his right hand to harden and increase his strength. His entire right hand was as hard as a metal claw, quickly grabbing at Grey. Whoosh! Just as Elise's metal claw was about to grab Grey, Grey moved. His speed also increased at a terrifying speed. In the nick of time, he dodged Elise's fierce claw. He had also used blood energy to increase his speed. When he stopped again, he appeared on Elise's left side. His right hand formed a claw like an angry dragon and viciously grabbed Elise's chest. 4 clear claw marks were left on the chest of his opponent's white armor. Boom! Ellis flew back as if he had been hit by a heavy hammer. This time, he flew back more than 20 meters. After falling to the ground, she couldn't get up for a while. She clutched her chest and struggled to get up several times, but failed. Grey's claw had also used blood energy. Although Elise wasn't seriously injured due to the armor's protection, Elise was in so much pain that she couldn't get up for a while. Seeing Elise unable to get up for a long time, Madame de Milan cried out in alarm and ran towards Elise. How are you hurt? After helping Elise sit up, Madame de Milan looked at Elise's pained face with worry. She then turned to Grey and angrily reprimanded him. Grey, how could you be so heavy-handed? Do you want to kill? Grey didn't reply because there was no need to. Although he wanted to be heavy-handed, he didn't have the chance with Viscount Fergus present. All right, Grey has already held back. Sure enough, Viscount Fergus interrupted Madame de Milan. As a ferocious warrior, he could naturally see that Grey hadn't been heavy-handed, so he directly interrupted Madame de Milan's reprimand. A moment later, everyone dispersed from the training ground with different expressions. Today's battle had allowed them to see and think of many things. In short, some people were happy while others were sad. For example, Sarah was happy. Her brother from the same father and mother was so strong, so she naturally felt a deep sense of pride. For example, Linda. Grey not only possessed powerful cultivation talent, but also outstanding fighting talent. He would definitely be valued by the Viscount in the future. His investment was clearly the right one. For example, Madame de Milan was worried. Gray, this illegitimate son, had displayed such talent and would definitely be valued by the Viscount. With him around, her prestige in the family would probably be severely affected. For example, Bernal. The talent Gray displayed was already a serious threat to his position as the eldest son. Moreover, with Gray's cultivation talent, it was only a matter of time before he surpassed him. This made him feel deeply threatened. On the way back, Elise's face was gloomy. He hadn't suffered any serious injuries. Apart from a slight bruise on his chest, there were only a few shallow scratches on his hands. But at this moment, his heart was filled with anger, shock, and jealousy. He was angry that he had lost to Gray and shocked that there was no problem with Gray's body. He had originally wanted to expose the problem with Gray's body through the battle, but it was obvious that there was no problem with Gray's body. Gray was also able to use the power of blood. It was obvious that his strength was a genuine lower blood warrior, and there were no problems as expected. He was jealous of the other's cultivation talent. He had only cultivated for a little more than a year, but he could already defeat him, who had cultivated for a full 3 years. This made him very jealous. Why would such talent appear in that illegitimate son? Why didn't he have such talent? Young Master Elise, Madame asked me to deliver this to you. A servant whose right hand was fixed by a wooden board and wrapped in bandages ran over with small steps. He held a box of ointment in his hand. It was the freckled servant Neeson, whose right hand had been broken by Gray. Scram! Seeing the fawning expression on the servant's face, Elise felt an inexplicable sense of disgust. She kicked the servant to the ground and walked straight past him without even looking at him. After letting the maid Barbara apply some ointment to his palms and bandaging them with gauze, Gray headed to the south of the castle where he usually cultivated. Because of the battle with Elise, his afternoon cultivation had been put on hold. However, he did not intend to give up on his afternoon cultivation, and immediately rushed over after the battle. Other than the maid Barbara, Sarah also came with him. She was wearing a light blue long dress, her long black hair draped behind her head and down to her shoulders. Her skin was fair, and although she was not old, she was already showing signs of being a beauty. When she was a few years older, her beauty would not be any less than Caroline's. "Brother, why aren't you cultivating in the training field?" Sarah asked curiously as she looked at the empty space where Gray usually cultivated. "It's quieter here, I won't be disturbed," Gray explained. Before his strength recovered to that of a lower blood warrior, he did not want anyone to disturb him or discover that he did not have the strength of a lower blood warrior. After his strength recovered to that of a lower blood warrior, he also did not want anyone to disturb him. This was because his daily cultivation progress was increasing too quickly compared to others. Even his maid, Barbara, had to wait for him in the distance. He would only summon her after he was done with his cultivation. "Oh!" Sarah responded with a sudden realization and then giggled. "Brother, you were really amazing today, you actually defeated Elise." Elise's sour face when she left was simply hilarious. Usually, when she was with Gray in private, Sarah addressed the 3 brothers and sisters born by Madame de Milan by their names. It was obvious that she did not approve of them in her heart. "It's all right," Gray smiled. Before the battle, he did not expect to win so easily. The only reason he agreed to the battle was because their strength was on par, and there was no reason for him to be afraid of the other party. Thinking of this, he could not help but think of the strange thoughts that had appeared in his mind during the battle earlier. Obviously, that should be a manifestation of the body's original owner's combat talent. In other words, he had obtained the body's original owner's combat talent through some inexplicable method. While this made him happy, he could not help but feel a trace of worry. Inexplicably possessing an extremely strong combat talent indeed made him happy, but the problems that arose from it made him rather worried. Had the soul of the body's original owner disappeared? If it had disappeared, how had it disappeared? Chapter 19. After watching the battle between Gray and Elise, Bernal wanted to stay and train in the afternoon. Unlike Elise, he was very serious about training. Unless there were special circumstances, he would train in the morning and afternoon. But after standing in the training field for a while, he just couldn't calm down. He couldn't immerse himself in training. His mind kept replaying the scene of Gray defeating Elise. Elise had already been surpassed by Gray. What about him? With his training talent, surpassing him was certain. In 3 years, maybe 2 years, he would surpass him. He felt a deep pressure, as well as a trace of helplessness and unwillingness. Lord Lind could guess the reason why Viscount Fergus had brought Gray into the castle for training. How could he not have guessed it? This was also the reason why he had been hostile towards Gray ever since Gray was brought to the castle. Although Viscount Fergus did the right thing in terms of the family's development and was beneficial to the family's interests, his personal interests would be harmed. In his heart, he didn't want to. Thinking of this, he couldn't calm down no matter how hard he tried. In the end, he left the training field and sat in a carriage with the Fergus family's Wind Wolf emblem. He left the castle and went to Fergus City next to the castle. Today, there was a party in Fergus City organized by Baron Ricardo's eldest son, Ian Ricardo. Of course, he was invited, but he refused. But now, he couldn't calm down no matter what, so he decided to go to the party and relax. After finishing his afternoon training, he bid farewell to Sarah, who was preparing to go to etiquette class. Gray took a bath and went to the library as usual. In the library, Caroline was already sitting at the round table, quietly reading. She was wearing a long dress with wide sleeves and a row of golden ribbons tied in front of her chest. Her brown hair was slightly curled, elegant and not lacking in elegance. After greeting the other party, Gray headed to the third row where the miscellaneous books were stacked. He started to look for books that interested him. He quickly locked onto his target. It was a book with a light brown leather cover. On it was written Aristocratic Territories. Taking the book out, Gray hugged it and went to the round table. He pulled out a chair and sat down. The maid, Barbara, poured him a cup of milk tea and a plate of crispy biscuits. He took a sip of the milk tea and flipped open a book to read. Aristocrats are divided into territories. Aristocratic status is only valid within the territory of the upper nobles. Outside the territory of the upper nobles will not be recognized. The records in the book was a tongue-twister. Gray read as he tried to understand it. He roughly understood it. The main point was that aristocratic status was not universal across the entire kingdom. It was only valid within a certain area. Take the Fergus family for example. The Fergus family was infeft by the Sidney Marquis family. The Sidney Marquis family was located in the south of the kingdom and had a territory of about 400,000 square kilometers. The area was almost equivalent to a province in Gray's previous life. Because the Fergus family was infeft by the Sidney Marquis family, the Fergus family's aristocratic status was only valid within the 400,000 square kilometers of the Sidney Marquis family's territory in the south of the kingdom. If they left this area and entered the territory of other families, the Fergus family's aristocratic status would not be recognized. This system was similar to the tiered loyalty system of the Middle Ages in Europe in Gray's previous life. However, there were some differences. The biggest difference was that aristocratic status was limited by territory. The Sidney Marquis family was infeft by the Fergus family. The Fergus family was loyal to the Sidney family. The Sidney Marquis family guaranteed the Fergus family's aristocratic status and rights within their own territory. The Fergus family was loyal to the Sidney family and not to the kingdom. It could only be said that the Sidney family was loyal to the kingdom, not the Fergus family. Under this system, the Sidney family and other aristocrats infeft by the kingdom are like the feudal lords in my previous life. Apart from paying taxes on time every year, everything in their territory is up to them. They have a lot of autonomy. However, the rights of ordinary aristocrats are greatly restricted. Aristocrats have special privileges in terms of food, building materials, and so on. The aristocratic territorial system obviously reduces the scope of these privileges. Gray frowned as he thought to himself. I'm afraid that it's not only the rights that are restricted, but also the space for advancement. The number of titles that each aristocrat could enfeoff was limited. As a Viscount family, the Fergus family could only enfeoff 3 barons and 10 lords. Once the number of barons and lords was filled, even if someone or a family had made a great contribution to the territory, they would not be enfeoffed. Although there was an assessment standard for each successor, and if 3 successive successors failed to meet the assessment standard, they would be demoted or stripped of their title. However, it still couldn't fundamentally solve the problem of not having enough titles to confer. Fergus City was the largest city within the Viscount Fergus's territory. It had a population of 30,000. From the fact that this city was named after Fergus, one could see the relationship between this city and the Fergus family. That's right, this city was directly under the Fergus family's control. Riding in a carriage, Bernal arrived at an elegantly decorated place in the city called the Zither Music Hall. He was then led to the second floor of the Zither Music Hall. The Zither Music Hall was one of the properties of Baron Ricardo's family. It was famous for its food and music. Professional pianists were stationed in the restaurant to deliver beautiful piano music to the guests. The entire second floor was used as a banquet hall. There were dozens of young men and women in the banquet hall. The man was wearing a double-breasted tuxedo that extended to his hips, accentuating his mature temperament. The woman was wearing a colorful round-necked lace dress with a corset around her waist, revealing her beautiful figure without a doubt. A few people had different family emblems embroidered on their sleeves. These people became the center of the banquet because family emblems were the symbols of aristocratic families. In other words, they came from aristocratic families. The arrival of the Viscount's eldest son, Bernal, naturally became the center of the banquet. He even overshadowed the previous nobles. However, these nobles didn't complain at all. Instead, they deliberately tried to curry favor with Bernal. Bernal clinked glasses with these people and greeted them with a forced smile on his face. Several good-looking women invited him to dance, but he politely declined. Young Master Bernal seems to be in a bad mood. A young man with light brown hair walked over with a glass of red wine in his hand. He wasn't very tall, only about 1.7 meters. He was the organizer of the banquet, the eldest son of Ricardo's family, Ian. You can tell. Hearing the words of the young man with light brown hair, Bernal raised his glass and clinked glasses with the other party. He drank the red wine in the glass in one gulp. You're different from usual. Ian nodded and said. He deliberately made friends with Bernal, and his relationship with Bernal was very good. He also understood Bernal quite well. Did something happen? My father brought his illegitimate son into the castle. You should have heard about it, right? Bernal sighed and said. I heard from my father that he has a very high talent for cultivation. Ian nodded. Not only did he hear about the Viscount's illegitimate son from his father, but he also heard some of his father's shocking speculations. It's not just a little high. Just today, Elise was defeated by him. I estimate that in at most 3 years, I may be surpassed by him. A bitter smile appeared on Bernal's face. His talent, is that terrifying? Ian was surprised. Bernal was now a middle-level blood warrior. In addition, Bernal would definitely continue to improve. If he surpassed Bernal in 3 years, wouldn't that mean that he could advance from a low-level blood warrior to a middle-level blood warrior in 2 years? Not only is his talent for cultivation strong, even his battle talent is terrifying. Bernal recalled the battle between Gray and Elise today, and the bitterness on his face became even more apparent. He seemed to be a little drunk, and as if he wanted to vent his depressed emotions, he opened his mouth and spoke of the worries and uneasiness that had been pressing on his chest. My father is probably thinking of, the last few words were said very softly. Only Ian, who was closest to him, could hear it. What? Lord Viscount really plans to? Ian's face was full of shock, and he looked at Bernal in disbelief. Although Fergus had already guessed this in his territory, when he really heard it from a member of the Fergus family, he still couldn't help but be shocked. This is only my guess, but the possibility is very high. Bernal waved at a servant passing by, and took a glass of red wine from the servant's tray. He once again drank it in one gulp. His mouth was full of bitterness, and he didn't taste the sweetness of the red wine at all. How can that be? It shouldn't be. Even if your talent is not as good as his, the Viscount shouldn't have chosen an illegitimate son, right? After a while, Ian came back to his senses and said doubtfully, "It is indeed impossible under normal circumstances, but what if this illegitimate son has the potential to become a berserker?" Bernal said helplessly. The potential to become a berserker? Ian was startled. Berserker, that was a berserker. If that illegitimate son of the Viscount really had the potential to become a berserker, then the Viscount was very likely to do so. Chapter 20. After the conversation, both of them fell into silence. Ian did not know what to say at a time like this, while Bernal downed glass after glass of red wine. In the end, Bernal drank until his head was heavy and his feet were light. Even with the strong physique of a middle-level blood warrior, he could not withstand the alcohol. He walked out of the banquet hall and went to the washroom on the first floor to ease the effects of the alcohol. "Who is it?" Suddenly, he noticed someone approaching from behind and quickly turned around. Even in his drunken state, he still noticed it at the first moment. When he turned around, he saw a man in a cloak with his head buried in a hood, revealing only the lower half of his face. "Young Master Bernal, don't be nervous. I have no ill intentions. I'm here to help you," the man said in a low voice. "Help me?" In his drunkenness, Bernal chuckled. "What can you help me with?" He obviously did not believe that the man could help him. "For example, I can help you kill that genius brother of yours," the cloaked man said with a smile. Whoosh! Bernal seemed to have been splashed with a bucket of cold water. He instantly sobered up and looked at the cloaked man in disbelief. A month ago, Grey was assassinated in Fergus City and was seriously injured and almost died. Within the Viscount's territory, there were many rumors. Among them, there were rumors that he was the instigator. Even Viscount Fergus summoned him for questioning. But in reality, this matter had nothing to do with him. Although he was unhappy that his position was threatened, it was not to the extent that he would send someone to assassinate him. After all, the other party was his father's son and was related to him by blood. After that assassination, Viscount Fergus did his best to clean up the rats in his territory. However, he didn't gain much. The mastermind seemed to have disappeared as well. He didn't expect the mastermind to appear again after a month and even find him. "Young Master Bernal, I'm sure you can guess Viscount Fergus's plan. Are you really willing to let your title be taken away by an illegitimate son?" The cloaked man laughed sinisterly. Bernal was startled, and his expression suddenly became uncertain. If he was willing to let his title be taken away by a bastard, he would not be so upset today, and would not have drunk so much wine. In the Purple Moon Kingdom, the title of nobility was usually inherited by the eldest son. Illegitimate children had no right of inheritance, but there were exceptions. If a noble applied for a title from a noble family and obtained permission, an illegitimate child could also inherit the title. In the history of the Purple Moon Kingdom, there had been cases of illegitimate children inheriting the title of nobility. The most famous case was the Turut family, one of the 7 great Marquis family. The current main family of the Turut family was inherited by an illegitimate child. And now, his father had plans to pass the title to his illegitimate son. "Which force do you represent?" Taking a deep breath, Bernal forced himself to calm down and asked. "Young Master Bernal, you don't need to know. Young Master Bernal, You only need to know that we can help you get rid of this illegitimate son. Of course, this will require your cooperation. After all, he has been staying in the castle and not coming out. Even if we want to assassinate him, it will be very difficult." The cloaked man's words were like the whispers of a devil in Bernal's ears. It caused an endless thought to emerge in his mind. Yes, as long as that guy is dead, the title of nobility will belong to me again. Whether it's Elise or Caroline, they won't have the ability to fight for the title with me. The next day, the weather was clear, and the sun was not too hot. The Purple Moon Kingdom was located in the north of the continent, and the temperature was lower all year round. Even during the hottest summer of the year, the temperature would not be too high. In the white stone training ground of Viscount Fergus Castle, two people were fighting. One of them was a young man wearing a grey battle suit. He had a head of black hair, but his eyes were deep blue. This person was grey. The other person was wearing a purplish-black home clothes. He was over 1.8 meters tall, and his face looked like it was carved by a knife. Standing in the training ground, he unconsciously exuded a strong aura. This person was Viscount Fergus. Whoosh! Stomping his feet on the ground, Grey bent his body slightly and shot out like a sharp arrow. He stretched out his right hand, his 5 fingers forming a claw, and fiercely clawed at Viscount Fergus' chest. Pah! Viscount Fergus stood still. Just as Grey's right hand was about to touch him, his right hand moved. He gently patted out, accurately hitting Grey's right wrist and blocking Grey's claw. As for Grey, his right hand was blocked, and his left hand shot out in front of him, attacking Viscount Fergus again. In the end, it was still blocked by Viscount Fergus, and he still used his right hand. His left hand was behind his back, and he did not intend to use it at all. Pah! 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 The two quickly exchanged dozens of blows. Grey's 2 hands attacked intensively, but they were still blocked by Viscount Fergus with one hand. He did not even move half a step. You must attack quickly, accurately, and ruthlessly. Once you attack, do not hesitate. You must aim at the enemy's neck, eyes, and other weak point. While blocking Grey's attacks, Viscount Fergus still had the spare energy to instruct Grey's attacks. It was not a battle at all. Whether it was in terms of experience or strength, it was the same. In the end, Viscount Fergus was the main attacker, and Grey could only passively defend. Pung! Viscount Fergus's right hand passed through the protection of Grey's 2 hands and gently patted Grey's body. Grey felt his body stagger and was pushed back. He finally stopped after taking a few steps back. Huff! Huff! Grey panted violently, and sweat kept flowing from his forehead. The battle had only lasted for a little over 10 minutes, but it was as if he had continuously practiced the blood technique several times. "You should rest first," Viscount Fergus said, seeing Grey like this. "Yes, father." Grey responded and walked to the pavilion next to him. The maid, Barbara, had already come forward and handed him a towel. "Elise, it's your turn." Viscount Fergus had no intention of leaving the training ground. Instead, he looked at the pavilion. Bernal, Caroline, and Elise were there. They had been watching the battle between Grey and Viscount Fox since the beginning. More accurately, they were instructing. Elise's challenge yesterday gave Viscount Fergus the idea of teaching the 4 of them battle techniques, so he gathered the 4 of them again today. Sarah had not been called because she had not yet implanted a bloodline to practice the blood technique. Instead, she was learning etiquette in the castle. Not only her, but Grey was also learning etiquette. Before coming to the castle, they had not received formal etiquette instruction, so they had to learn etiquette from the beginning. As a man, Grey's lessons were much simpler than Sarah's. There were only simple lessons such as noble dancing and daily etiquette. Therefore, it was much easier for him than for Sarah. He would only learn etiquette on Saturday and Sunday. After Grey, Elise, Caroline, and Bernal went up one after another and received guidance from Viscount Fergus. Grey drank fruit juice with ice as he observed the battle between the 3 of them and Viscount Fergus. Ice was stored in the castle's ice cellar during winter. Based on Gray's observation, the one with the best performance was Bernal. His opponent's battle techniques were very skillful. Every attack was very threatening. Gray estimated that he was not his opponent now. It was not only because of the difference in strength, but also because of the difference in battle technique. He was able to defeat Elise yesterday because Elise also had no battle experience. Obviously, Bernal should have battle experience. Gray even felt that Bernal might already have experience in killing people. With the threat of the Blood Fiends and the other three kingdoms, even the nobles could not guarantee that they would not have to fight in their lifetime. Therefore, the nobles of this world paid great attention to the training of their children, especially in the area of battle. Some special noble families would give their children a baptism at the age of 18. They would even fight with prisoners on death row and use the prisoners' lives to complete the baptism. Next was Caroline. Although it was the same as Gray and Elise's first battle, her grasp of timing and the threat of her attacks were obviously stronger than Elise's. It could be seen that she had some talent in battle. After the 4 battles, Viscount Fergus came to the pavilion. The servant served him iced ale. He took a sip and looked at Bernal. Compared to a year ago, your battle techniques have improved greatly. It seems that in this year, not only did you not slack off in your training, you also often found opportunities to hone your battle technique. Yes, I usually train with the soldiers in the castle. Occasionally, I would ask Lord Linda for guidance. Bernal replied respectfully. Very good. Viscount Fergus nodded in satisfaction. His gaze swept over Gray and the other two. From now on, the 3 of you should pay more attention to battle training. Strength is important, but battle techniques are equally important. Only when strength and battle techniques coexist can you unleash your full potential. Yes. Chapter 21. In the following days, Viscount Fergus would specially take time out every day to instruct Gray and the other 3 in battle. Gray felt that his battle skills were rapidly improving. Battle skills could only be improved in battle. Of course, the rapid improvement of his battle skills was also related to the battle talent he inherited from the original owner of this body. In contrast, although Elise had received the same guidance as him, her battle skills were obviously not as fast as his. Viscount Fergus's castle was located on a low slope. 3 sides were steep, and only one side could be entered and exited. On this side there were tall walls and arrow towers that were tall enough for people to stand on. This made the entire castle easy to defend and difficult to attack. It was very difficult to capture. There was a large piece of flat land at the foot of the castle. It had been completely enclosed and used as a place to plant fodder, feed the horses, and train the horses. Giddy up, in the horse field, Gray rode on a black horse. He used his legs to lightly squeeze the horse's abdomen, urging it to gallop forward. He used the reins to pull left and right, turning the horse's direction. The black horse he sat on was close to 2 meters long and 1 meter tall. Its 4 limbs were robust, and one could clearly see its developed muscles. However, it did not appear bloated. There were 4 people beside him. They were Viscount Fergus, Bernal, Elise, and Caroline. The 4 of them were also riding horses. Among them, Bernal rode a brown horse, Elise rode a horse with black and white fur, and Caroline rode a horse with pure white fur. On the other hand, Viscount Fergus was riding a horse with blood-red fur. Viscount Fergus had been riding this horse when they were encircling the bandit. Today, Viscount Fergus did not conduct battle training with them. Instead, he brought them to the horse field for equestrian training. This time, the one with the worst performance was Gray. Bernal and the others had started equestrian training from a young age, so they were naturally very adept at riding. On the other hand, Gray only started his equestrian training after he came to the castle. He started much later than the 3 of them, so naturally, there was a huge gap between his skills and theirs. After galloping on the horse field for half an hour, when the horses they were sitting on were panting heavily, The 5 of them stopped, jumped down from their horses, and led them away. Gray, you need to practice your equestrian skills more in the future. For nobles, proficient equestrian skills are essential. Viscount Fergus looked at Gray and said, "Yes, father." Gray nodded. He could clearly feel Elisa's proud gaze, but he ignored it. Instead, he looked at the blood-red horse that Viscount Fergus was leading. This horse was obviously taller than the horses that Gray and the other 3 were riding. Its body was 2.5 meters long and its height was 1.5 meters. Its body was filled with streamlined muscles, and when compared to the other horses, it stood out like a crane among chickens, like a king among horses. It was obvious that this horse's bloodline was not ordinary. Whether it was its endurance or running speed, it was obviously better than the other horses. After galloping for half an hour, the horse was only panting slightly. After being led for a short distance, it returned to normal. "Father, what breed is this horse of yours?" Seeing that the horse was not ordinary, Gray asked curiously in his heart. "This is a crimson blood horse, one of the best breeds of horses in the kingdom." Viscount Fergus looked at the crimson blood horse and replied, "In terms of running speed, it is comparable to some murderous level blood fiends." "It is comparable to some murderous level blood fiends?" Gray was surprised. This horse was indeed as extraordinary as he had imagined, and it had even surpassed some of the other horses. Its running speed was comparable to a murderous level blood fiend. This was not something that an ordinary horse could achieve. The difference between a blood fiend and an ordinary animal was like the difference between a blood warrior and an ordinary soldier. If an ordinary soldier was not implanted with the blood of a blood fiend, even if he constantly tempered his body, it would be difficult for him to be comparable to a blood warrior. However, this horse's running speed was comparable to a murderous level blood fiend, breaking the gap between a blood fiend and an ordinary animal. Even if it was only in terms of speed, it was extraordinary. "Why? Are you interested in my horse?" Viscount Fergus looked at Gray with a faint smile. No. Gray shook his head. Although he was envious, he did not want to own it. In the entire castle, only Viscount Fergus had such a warhorse. One could imagine how precious such a warhorse was. Viscount Fergus took in the envious look on Gray's face and said with a smile, "If you can raise your strength to a middle-level blood warrior by the coming-of-age ceremony at the age of 18, I will give you a crimson blood horse." Whoosh! In an instant, Gray could feel 2 pairs of eyes on him. He turned his head and saw Elise and Bernal looking at him with eyes full of envy. Who wouldn't want a good horse when riding a horse? Especially a horse whose running speed was comparable to a murderous level blood fiend. One could imagine how envious they were. Even Gray himself couldn't help but reveal an expression of shock and surprise. Even though he hadn't been training horses for a long time, Gray had already fallen in love with the feeling of galloping on a horse. Naturally, he yearned for a good horse whose speed was comparable to a murderous grade blood fiend. "Do your best," Viscount Fergus said with a smile when he saw the surprised expression on Gray's face. "Yes, I will." Gray nodded solemnly, but in his heart, he was already overjoyed. With his current cultivation speed, as long as he maintained it, not to mention 2 years, he would be able to become a middle-level blood warrior in less than a year. Therefore, the crimson blood horse was already in his bag. Bernal's eyes flashed as he led the horse to Gray's side and said to Gray, "Gray, the eldest son of the Ricardo family, Ian Ricardo, is organizing a hunt the day after tomorrow and has invited us. Do you want to come along?" "Hunt?" Hearing Bernal's invitation to hunt, Gray's first thought was to be on guard. Last time, the original owner of his body was assassinated because he attended a gathering in Fergus City. Now that he heard an invitation to hunt, and it was from one of the suspects behind the scenes, he reflexively refused. "Thank you, Brother Bernal, for your kindness. You guys have fun, I won't be going." "Gray, although cultivation is important, you still need to relax occasionally." The people participating in this hunt are all the children of the noble families in the territory. They can help you expand your network," Bernal advised earnestly. "In the future, I just want to focus on cultivation for now." Gray still refused. Although he also yearned for this aristocratic hunting life, compared to his life, he obviously valued his own life more. But at this moment, Viscount Fergus unexpectedly spoke. "Hunt? That's a good activity. Gray, you have stayed in the castle for so long, you should go out for a walk." But Gray was anxious. He already had the idea of going out for a walk, but with the mastermind behind the scenes, he didn't dare to go out casually. "Don't worry about safety." Viscount Fergus seemed to have seen through Gray's concerns and said, "I'll have Lord Lind accompany you. He'll ensure your safety." "All right, it's settled then." Finally, Viscount Fergus made the final decision. Yes. Since it was already decided by Viscount Fergus, Gray could only agree. With Lord Lind accompanying him, he felt more at ease. With Lord Lind's strength as an upper-level blood warrior, even if there was an assassin, it would be difficult to assassinate him. In the afternoon, a carriage drove out of Viscount Fergus' castle. Bernal was sitting in the carriage. He stopped the carriage at the music hall and left from the back door of the music hall. He came to a more remote residential area. After knocking on the door opened and he was welcomed in by a man dressed like a commoner. A moment later, a man with a cloak appeared. It was the cloaked man that Bernal met in the washroom of the music hall last time. "Young Master Bernal, you are here. It seems that you have thought it through." The cloaked man smiled and said with confidence, "Yes, I have." Bernal nodded fiercely. The day after tomorrow, he will go hunting in the stone forest outside the city, but there will be an upper-level blood warrior with him. Can you do it? Upper-level blood warrior? Although it is a little troublesome, it is not a problem. Don't worry, as long as you can lure him out, leave the rest to us," the cloaked man said confidently. "Okay, I hope you will keep your promise and can do it." Feeling the confidence of the cloaked man, Bernal breathed a sigh of relief. "Don't worry, we will not let young Master Bernal down." Chapter 22. 2 days later, in the morning, Gray, Caroline, Elise, and Bernal rode their horses and left the castle, followed by Lord Linda and more than 10 elite soldiers. Gray rode a black warhorse and wore a gray-white riding suit. The jacket was made of leather and had 2 buttons. It was tight to the body and had the Fergus family emblem on the cuff. The trousers were also made of leather and were very loose at the crotch and thighs, but gradually tightened below the knees. This design was very convenient to ride. This set of riding suit was made by the tailor in the castle in the past 2 days. With his current status in the castle, as long as his request was not too excessive, he would be able to satisfy it. Caroline was riding a white warhorse, wearing a pale white riding suit. The tight top showed her beautiful curves, and her 2 slender legs looked even more slender against the backdrop of the breeches. Elise rode a black and white warhorse and wore a golden riding suit. Bernal rode a brown warhorse and wore a black riding suit. Both of them had long blonde hair and a handsome face. The temperament of a noble son was immediately apparent. The group of more than 10 people left the castle and followed the streets in the city that were wide enough for 2 carriages to pass side by side. They arrived near the city gate of Fergus. There were already dozens of people waiting here. Among these dozens of people, the ones at the outermost periphery were soldiers in charge of protecting the safety of these people. In the middle, there were 12 young men and women in the same riding suit. There were 7 men and 5 women. The men had a noble temperament and the women had a graceful temperament. Under the contrast of the riding suit, the nobility was very threatening. Seeing the arrival of Gray's group, the 12 people were led by 2 people to welcome them. One of the 2 people in the lead was a young man with light brown hair and a height of 1.7 meters. It was Ian Ricardo of the Ricardo family. The other person also had light brown hair, but it was a young girl. The young girl was about 1.7 6 meters tall and should be about the same age as Gray. Her skin was fair and her light brown hair was tied behind her head with a hair clip hanging down to her waist. Under the sky-blue riding suit, she had a chest that was beginning to take shape and a pair of very attractive long legs. This was a girl whose beauty was not inferior to Caroline's. "Young Master Bernal, young Master Elise, and Miss Caroline, you're here." Ian greeted Bernard and the other two and introduced them to each other. "Let me introduce you. This is my sister, Sia Ricardo. This is my younger brother, Gray." Bernal also introduced Gray and these nobles to each other. "Gray, this is Ian Ricardo of the Ricardo family. This is Sia Ricardo of the Ricardo family. This is Jeff Ward of the Ward family. This is," when Bernal introduced Gray's identity, the dozen or so nobles couldn't help but look at Gray with inquisitive and curious gazes. Although they hadn't seen Gray before, it was obvious that they had heard about Gray. Although he was an illegitimate child, Viscount Fergus had taken a fancy to him. Some time ago, after the assassination attempt, Viscount Fergus flew into a rage and wiped out all the rats in his territory. It was enough to see how much Viscount Fergus valued him. In particular, some of the nobles who had faintly heard of some speculations about his title were extremely enthusiastic because this person in front of them might be the one they would pledge loyalty to in the future. "Greetings, young Master Gray. Greetings, young Master Gray." Therefore, when Bernal introduced them, they all greeted Gray very politely. "Greetings." Gray smiled and responded to them one by one. After meeting up, the group started to move towards their destination, the Stone Slope Forest. The Stone Slope Forest was a forest that extended for more than 10 miles within Viscount Fergus territory. It was about 7 to 8 miles away from Fergus City by foot. Within the forest, one could occasionally see some small rocky hills, which was why it was called the Stone Slope Forest. Before the Fergus family was bestowed this territory, they would often encounter large wild beasts such as tigers and bears. During the winter, there would often be hungry wild beasts that would leave the forest and attack the nearby villages. However, after the Fergus family took over this territory, they had already cleared out this forest many times. The large wild beasts had basically all been cleared out, leaving only a few wild hares, pheasants and other small animals. The group rode on horses for a leisurely stroll for a full half an hour before arriving at the Stone Slope Forest. After arriving at the Stone Slope Forest, the group dismounted and tied their horses outside the forest. Including Gray and the other three, a total of 16 nobles began to hunt in groups of 3 to 5. There were more than 10 people in the group, including the guards. Moving together would cause too much commotion, so they had to split into groups. Bernal and Elise were invited and had already formed groups with the nobles they were familiar with. The remaining Gray and Caroline decided to form a group as well. "Miss Caroline, Master Gray, may I join your group?" At this moment, a beautiful young lady walked over and greeted the two of them. The young lady was wearing a light blue horse outfit. She was Sia Ricardo of the Ricardo family. "Sure, there are just a few people." Caroline nodded in agreement. Gray naturally had no objections. Thus, the three of them formed a group. With quivers on their backs and bows in their hands, they chose a direction and began to enter the forest. At the same time Lin, Za, Gu, Panai Huang Can, Lu, Shua, Lu. Seeing Lord Lind leave, some of the nobles were slightly surprised. Lord Lind had blended in with the soldiers. Even his attire was no different from an ordinary soldier. Thus, at the very beginning, they did not recognize this person as Lord Lind. However, many of them had met Lord Lind before and quickly recognized him among the soldiers. Some of them wanted to go up and greet Lord Lind, but were stopped by Lord Lind with a wave of his hand. They guessed that Lord Lind was probably carrying out a guard mission, so they gave up. However, their eyes were secretly paying attention, wanting to see who Lord Lind was protecting. Now, seeing Lord Lind leave with Gray and the other two, they could not help but have guesses in their hearts. It was obviously not possible that he was protecting Miss Caroline. That meant that Lord Lind was sent to protect Master Grey. Could it be that the Viscount values this illegitimate son more than Master Bernal? Some of the nobles could not help but secretly think. Although there was the incident of the assassination attempt last time, to actually have a high-ranking blood warrior with a title of nobility as a guard, wasn't this stance a little too grand? Bernal had also noticed Lord Lind's departure. His eyes flashed, but no one knew what he was thinking. I heard that Master Grey is now a lower-level blood warrior? Grey's group of 8 went deeper into the forest. Sia showed a strong interest in Grey, and asked Grey softly as they explored the forest. Because they were too close, there was even a faint fragrance coming from her body. It was unknown whether it was the fragrance of a woman or some kind of perfume. Yes, I reached it not long ago. Grey nodded and replied casually. If it was any other time, he would be quite happy to be shown interest by such a beautiful girl. However, he did not have the slightest bit of happiness now. This was not the right place. If one paid close attention, they would notice that his gaze was vigilantly looking around. Vigilance, that's right, vigilance. He was not looking for prey, but for possible danger. Since 2 days ago, he had been on high alert. From his point of view, Bernal's invitation to hunt this time did not have any good intentions. Therefore, he had rejected the invitation the moment he heard it. Unfortunately, Viscount Fergus had made the final decision, and he could only follow. Fortunately, there was Lin. Unless the target was a ferocious blood warrior or several upper-level blood warriors, otherwise Lin. He actually became a lower-level blood warrior in a year. He's much more powerful than my elder brother. My idiot elder brother actually used a full 3 years to become a lower-level blood warrior. Sia's beautiful face was filled with amazement as she spoke. Being born into a baron's family, although she did not lack basic necessities, she did not have the opportunity to practice blood technique. After all, to learn blood techniques, one would need to use the essence of blood fiends as well as medicine to implant the bloodline. The essence of blood fiends and the accompanying medicine were extremely precious. The Ricardo family obviously did not want to invest so much on a woman. Your elder brother is already very good. Still maintaining his vigilance, Grey opened his mouth and spoke. There was no flattery in his words. To practice blood techniques, one's aptitude and resources were indispensable. Moreover, resources accounted for a large portion of the total. The Ricardo family's practice conditions were naturally not as good as the Fergus family's. For example, it was impossible to supply blood fiends once a month. Bernal became a lower-level blood warrior in 2 years when he was rich in resources. Ian Ricardo was able to become a lower-level blood warrior in 3 years when he was not rich in resources. Their talents should be similar. Russell. Suddenly, there was movement in the bushes in front of them. Grey's gaze focused and he was on guard. He saw a brightly colored pheasant running out of the bushes in a panic. It must have been alerted by the movements of Grey and the others. This pheasant was covered in red, blue, and green feathers. It was rather plump, probably because it lacked natural predators and had sufficient food. Although there were hidden dangers, they were here to hunt after all. Naturally, it was impossible for them to not attack after seeing their prey. Swoosh! Grey took out an arrow and drew the bow. The arrow shot out like a black shadow. Poof! The arrow pierced through the pheasant's back forcefully and went straight down. Part of the arrow even pierced the ground. Chapter 23. Amazing! Sia looked at Grey in surprise. She had wanted to make a move just now, but she did not practice blood arts, so her reaction was not as fast as Grey's. That was why Grey beat her to it. Cough, cough, it's all right. Grey blushed at the girl's praise. That arrow probably had a lot to do with luck, because before this, Neither he nor the original owner of this body had ever used a bow. However, there was a kind of excitement in his heart, not because of the girl's praise, but because this was the first time he had hunted prey in both his previous and current lives. In his previous life, firearms and bows were strictly controlled, and there were many regulations to protect wild animals. There was once a university student who was sentenced for stealing a nest of bird eggs. Naturally, he did not dare to hunt, as he did not know what kind of nationally protected animal he had hunted. However, he had heard of some artificial hunting grounds where there were all kinds of wild animals for people to hunt. There were even wild boars, but those were only for the rich. It was naturally impossible for an office worker like Gray to do so. He walked over and pulled out the arrow. He lifted the pheasant and weighed it in his hand. It was probably 3 to 4 kilograms and was very plump. Gray passed the pheasant to a guard beside him and threw away the arrow. The arrow was covered in blood, and Gray did not want his hands to be stained with blood. Rustle! 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 The group set off again, searching for wild animals in the forest. Whoosh! Not long after, the bushes in front of them moved, and a gray-furred rabbit quickly jumped out and fled. Its speed was obviously faster than the pheasant from before. Gray, Caroline, and Sia all took out arrows from the quiver on their backs and shot. Gray's arrow stabbed into the ground beside the rabbit. 2/3 of the way in, and it was accompanied by a slight tremor. His strength was sufficient, but he did not manage to hit the rabbit. Obviously, the arrow from before was mostly due to luck, and now he had recovered his true strength. Pooh! Just as Gray was about to take out another arrow to continue shooting, he saw an arrow accurately hit the wild rabbit. The arrow pierced through the hare's back and came out of its abdomen. It was the same as the arrow Gray shot at the pheasant. It also penetrated the prey and went into the soil. Obviously, the strength of this arrow was very strong. It wasn't me, it was Miss Caroline. Sia quickly walked over and glanced at the symbol on the arrow. She was slightly disappointed. Like Gray, she had missed as well. She had thought that she had hit the target. It's your turn next time. Caroline walked over and pulled out the arrow. She lifted the hare and weighed it like Gray before handing it to the guard. It was obvious that she enjoyed hunting as well. The group continued to move forward and encountered other wild animals one after another. Not only were there wild rabbits and pheasants, there were even wild ducks and large birds with green feathers. The 3 of them gained again. Sia finally gained something, and Gray gained something again. Sia had practiced archery before and had a certain foundation in archery. Although Gray did not have any foundation in archery, he had the observational skills and insight of a low-level blood warrior. He could also hunt with some difficulty. However, among the 3 of them, the one who gained the most was Caroline. With the observational skills and insight of a low-level blood warrior, coupled with a certain foundation in archery, Gray and Sia were naturally not as good as her. After shooting so much prey, it was obvious that she could not hide the smile on her face. This young lady, who usually liked to quietly read books, was also very interested in such an elegant activity like hunting. Looking at the prey in the hands of the other 4 guards, apart from Lord Lind, most of which she had hunted, Caroline smiled again and said, "Let's go back." "Okay." Gray and Sia both replied. They did not know how the other groups had gained, but their group had gained a lot. Of course, most of it belonged to Caroline. What kind of books does Sister Caroline like to read? "I read all kinds of books, but I prefer biographical books like The Count of Cristo." "The Count of Cristo?" "It's in my family's library. I've read it before." "Sigh, the love between the Count and that commoner girl is really poignant." "Indeed, it's poignant. Due to the bountiful harvest, the few of them were in a good mood. They chatted as they returned, especially Sia and Caroline. They chatted quite happily. After a while, they addressed each other as Sister Caroline. Gray quietly listened to the conversation between the 2. He would occasionally chime in, but most of the time, he was paying attention to the situation around him. In his heart, he had a feeling that this hunt would not be peaceful, so he was extra vigilant. After passing through a bush, they came to a place full of tall trees. Suddenly, swoosh! A black shadow shot out from the dense foliage of the tall trees at an unimaginably terrifying speed, shooting toward Gray. Because he had been on guard and had never let his guard down, Gray noticed the black shadow shooting toward him. However, because it was too fast, he did not see what it was. Assassin! He dodged to the side by reflex. Gray, be careful! Caroline exclaimed. Because she was chatting with Sia, she noticed the black shadow later than Gray. When she saw it, the black shadow was already 1 meter away from Gray. Not good, I can't dodge it. Gray, who had been dodging for a long time, was pale. It happened too suddenly. He did not have time to mobilize blood force. For him, who had just become a low-level blood warrior, it was impossible to mobilize blood force quickly. This was a common disadvantage of low-level blood warriors. Clang! At this moment, just as the black shadow was about to hit Gray, a flash of light appeared, and the crisp sound of metal colliding rang out. The black shadow was ejected, shooting toward the ground beside it. It was a completely black arrow. After being ejected, the entire arrow had sunk into the ground, leaving only the arrow feather outside. One could imagine how fast this arrow was and how powerful it was, and the figure of the light could be seen clearly. It was the body of a sword, and the hilt of the sword was in the hands of a man with a black mustache. The man with the black mustache was none other than Lord Linda. At the critical moment, he used the sword in his hand to knock away the arrow that was flying toward Gray. Protect the young masters and young ladies. After knocking away the arrow that was flying toward Gray, he ordered loudly with a serious expression. The other 4 guards quickly abandoned the prey in their hands and pulled out the weapons at their waists, protecting Gray, Caroline, and Sia in the middle. At this moment, in the direction where the arrow was shot, a figure jumped down from the dense foliage of the forest and pounced towards them. It was a man with a bow on his back. The one who shot the arrow was probably him. He wore a green battle suit, and his face was covered with a black cloth. Only a pair of brown eyes could be seen, and they were filled with cold, killing intent. Gotcha! He pulled out 2 short knives from his left and right legs, one in each hand, and rushed toward them. Whoosh! Holding a long sword, Lord Linda slashed at the man. Clang! The man who suddenly attacked blocked Lord Linda's sword with both knives in front of him. The 2 men quickly exchanged blows. Lord Linda's movement speed was extremely fast. He appeared on his opponent's left and right, and the long sword in his hand stabbed at his opponent. As for the man who suddenly attacked, although he was not as fast as Lord Linda, he was as agile as a monkey, jumping up and down. He either blocked Lord Linda's sword with both knives, or twisted his body to avoid Lord Linda's sword. For a moment, Lord Linda was not able to take down his opponent, and was instead being held back by him. To be able to hold back Lord Linda, this man's strength was very likely that he was an upper-level blood warrior. At this moment, from the other side of the forest, another man rushed out and attacked Gray and the others. He was also wearing a green battle suit, and his face was covered with a black cloth. However, his body was much more muscular than the previous one. From Gray's estimation, this man was at least 2 meters tall. Thump, thump, thump. When the man ran, he was like a moving heavy tank. Every step he took left a clear footprint on the ground. 2 of the 4 guards guarding Gray and the other 2 immediately went to meet this man, and the standard long knives in their hands slashed at him. Facing the long knives of the 2 guards, the burly man did not dodge. Instead, he clenched his hands into fists and punched out. Clang! The 2 fists collided with the 2 knives, and an ear-piercing metallic sound rang out. On each of his hands there was a metal glove. Bang! After swatting away the incoming weapons, the 2 metal-gloved fists did not lose their momentum and fiercely hammered the bodies of the 2 guards. The 2 guards were instantly sent flying backwards and fell to the ground. They writhed in pain, and blood flowed from the corners of their mouth. Who knew how many of their ribs were broken? The soldiers who could be selected as guards by the castle were obviously the best among the soldiers. However, they were just ordinary people who had undergone training after all. In addition, the burly blood warrior in front of them was obviously not an ordinary lower blood warrior. Therefore, 2 of them had already been defeated in the first exchange. Young Master Gray, Miss Caroline, run! Seeing that 2 of their companions had been defeated in an instant, the other 2 guards hesitated for a moment, but had already rushed towards the burly man without hesitation. Although they knew that they were no match for him, they were still elite soldiers, and did not retreat because of this. Split up and run, his target is me. After saying this, Gray turned and ran. The burly man's strength was obviously not that of an ordinary low-level blood warrior, and he had no intention of fighting with the burly man at all. However, after running a few steps, he realized that there was someone following behind him. It was Caroline. She did not run separately, and instead planned to run together with Gray. "We can take care of each other." She opened her mouth to speak in response to Gray's strange gaze. The 2 of them did not say anything more, and quickly ran in the direction of the dense forest. There should have been many groups returning from outside the forest, and there should be quite a number of guards. As long as they could escape there, the burly man should not be able to do anything to them. After all, there were so many ants that they could even bite an elephant to death. Thump, thump, thump. However, the 2 of them had not run more than 100 meters when a rumbling sound came from behind them. Chapter 24. Thump, thump, thump. The burly man looked clumsy, but his movement speed was not slow. With a body of over 2 meters, every step he took was close to 2 meters. The distance between him and the 2 of them was quickly closing. Soon, the distance between them was less than 10 meters. There's no escape. Understanding that there was no time to escape from the dense forest, Gray decisively turned around and pounced towards the burly man. Since there was no escape, then he would fight. His heart pounded, as if it would burst like a balloon at any time. However, Gray suppressed the fear in his heart and pounced towards the burly man. As an adult, at this time, he displayed a strong mental fortitude. Although it was very likely that he would not be a match for his opponent, even if it meant death, he would at least try to put up a fight. If he did not even put up a fight, then he really would not have the slightest chance of survival. As he ran, he bent down and pulled out a dagger that was 20 centimeters long from his left boot. Because he was on guard, he had made some preparations. This dagger was what he had prepared to deal with any unexpected situations. This was already the limit of what he could prepare. After all, he was only an illegitimate child. Even if he had been favored, it had only been in the last 3 months. Naturally, he did not have anything like soft armor with strong defense. Pulling out the dagger and holding it in his right hand, Gray's heart pounded wildly, but at the same time, he could not help but tremble slightly. There was nervousness, but also a trace of an inexplicable emotion similar to anticipation. At this moment, the body that Gray had fused with, the original owner's innate combat talent, was extremely active, thirsting for battle. "Humph, your courage is commendable." Seeing Gray pouncing towards him with a dagger in hand, the burly man's face under the black cloth revealed a trace of a sinister smile, as well as a trace of contempt. An illegitimate child of a small noble family, who had not even had his coming-of-age ceremony, actually dared to resist him. An upper-level blood warrior who had experienced hundreds of battles. He did have some courage, but it was futile. He stomped on the ground, leaving a heavy footprint on the ground. His burly bear-like body shot out like a cannonball, leaping high into the air. Then, he punched down from above, fiercely hammering at Gray, who was charging at him. Phew! Gray's heart pounded even more fiercely as he looked at the huge fist that was as big as a sandbag, bringing with it a terrifying whistling sound as it descended from the sky and pounded towards him. However, the trace of desire in his heart became even more intense, spreading out and actually suppressing most of the nervousness in his heart. Battle talent was born for battle. Only in a real battle would it be fully unleashed. Unlike the battle with Elise, there was nothing to worry about in that battle. He knew that Viscount Fergus wouldn't let him be injured or killed. However, things were different now. There was no Viscount Fergus here, only an enemy who wanted to kill him. In such a desperate situation, his combat talent was stimulated to the greatest extent. Whoosh! Gray channeled the blood force into his legs and moved horizontally like a gust of wind. Rumble! The sandbag-sized iron fist smashed into the ground. The ground trembled violently. Mud, weeds, and leaves flew everywhere. A shallow pit appeared on the ground. The burly man was half squatting beside the pit. His fist, which was wearing a metal glove, was embedded in the pit. Whoosh! Behind him, a figure appeared. It was Gray. Different blood arts could cultivate different blood force. Gray's blood art, which was cultivated through the Windwolf, had a mediocre increase in defense and strength. However, the increase in speed was extremely great. Relying on this short burst of speed, he dodged the burly man's fist and circled behind him. Whoosh! Holding the dagger in his hand, Gray's face flashed with a rarely seen ruthlessness. He channeled the blood force into his right hand and ruthlessly stabbed towards the burly man's exposed neck. In his previous life, he was just an ordinary office worker. In this life, he had no experience in killing people. However, when forced into a dead end, even a rabbit would bite, let alone a human. In this kind of situation, it was either you die or I die. Gray naturally didn't want to die, so killing his opponent was his only choice. Whoosh! The dagger quickly approached the burly man. The physical fitness of a low-level blood warrior wasn't bad to begin with. In addition to the slight increase in strength from the blood force, the power of his dagger was extraordinary. Gray estimated that as long as he could stab him, the burly man would die without a doubt. However, at this moment, just as his dagger was about to stab the burly man suddenly turned around and looked at him with contempt. Then, the burly man's thick arm punched out with a thunderous momentum towards Gray's dagger. His glove was made of metal, so he wasn't afraid of the dagger's sharpness. However, an unexpected scene occurred again. Whoosh! Gray's figure flickered again and quickly moved to the burly man's side. The dagger changed from a stab to a slash, cutting towards the burly man's neck. He had used the last trace of the blood force. At this point, his blood force was completely exhausted. Moreover, this movement just now was also within his calculations. He was already prepared to mobilize the blood force. Otherwise, under the burly man's fist, he wouldn't have the time to mobilize the blood force. That's right, he had already guessed that the burly man would be able to react and block his attack from behind. The previous attack was just a feint. This was his killer move. Not good. Gray actually changed directions midway and appeared on his side. This indeed shocked the burly man. It was too late to turn around and block. The burly man twisted his body, causing his neck to be forcefully displaced to a certain extent. Poof! The dagger slashed across the burly man's body. However, because of the twisting of his body, it slashed the shoulder of the burly man's combat armor, leaving a deep scratch. Boom! Then, the burly man's fist immediately turned around and punched Gray, who was on his side. Whoosh! The attack he had pinned his hopes on was dodged. With the blood force exhausted, Gray had no time to dodge. He could only sweep his dagger out to block the punch. Clang! The iron fist collided with the dagger. The terrifying impact transmitted from the dagger to Gray's right hand, causing his right hand to become completely numb. The dagger in his hand flew out and he staggered to the ground. "You're not bad. You actually almost hurt me." The burly man turned around and looked at Gray with a slightly surprised gaze. There was a gap of 2 levels between a high-ranking blood warrior and a low-ranking blood warrior. Under normal circumstances, it would be a completely one-sided situation. However, he didn't expect that he would almost be hurt by his opponent. If not for the protection of his combat armor, he would probably have been injured by now. Although he was surprised, the movements of his hands didn't stop because of this. After turning around, he immediately smashed his fist toward Gray's head. The grayish-black metal gloves quickly enlarged in Gray's eyes. Caroline, who was rushing over, shouted anxiously. She wanted to attack the burly man and force him to give up on attacking Gray, but it was already too late. When Gray had rushed toward the burly man, she had hesitated for a moment. Gray might not be clear about the difference between a low-ranking blood warrior and a high-ranking blood warrior, but she, who had received the most orthodox training from the Ferguson family, knew that two low-ranking blood warriors would never be a match for a high-ranking blood warrior. Although she had only hesitated for a moment before immediately rushing toward the burly man, this short moment had created a gap between her and Gray and the burly man. She could only watch helplessly as the burly man's fist struck toward Gray. Is this the difference between a high-ranking blood warrior and a high-ranking blood warrior? The fist continued to enlarge in his eyes. Gray frantically tried to save himself, but the blood power in his body had already been exhausted. Even if it hadn't been completely exhausted, it was already too late to mobilize it in such a short period of time. He could only try his best to lean his body to the side, but this movement seemed to be in slow motion against the burly man's fist. It was obviously too late. The fist was about to smash into his head. His skull would shatter and his brain would explode. Whoosh! Suddenly, the sound of wind rustling could be heard in the mountain forest that had been completely silent. Ha! Following that, a loud shout rang out. It was like a sharp wolf's howl. The sound carried a terrifying penetrating power, spreading out and spreading throughout the entire stone forest. Then, a green blade-shaped light appeared, shooting out at an unimaginable speed. In the blink of an eye, it struck the burly man's body. Poof! The green armor on the burly man's body, which Gray's dagger had previously been unable to penetrate, was torn apart like paper, revealing a clear crack that spread across the entire torso. Blood spurted out from the crack, splattering several meters away. Quite a lot of it splattered on Gray, who was sprawled on the ground, staining his light gray riding attire red. The burly man, on the other hand, was sent flying backward, crashing into a tree with a thud. He slid down weakly. The black cloth covering his face fell, revealing a boorish, square face. His square face was filled with fear, confusion, and realization. Blade of wind? How could it be? Because of his heavy injuries, his voice was intermittent. Even Gray, who was rather close to him, couldn't clearly hear what he was saying. Pa pa pa. A figure walked out from the dense forest. He wore a light yellow noble robe with a wolf symbol embroidered on the sleeve. He had a head full of golden hair and a chiseled face. Father! Caroline cried out in alarm, her face filled with disbelief. She really didn't expect Viscount Fergus to appear at such a crucial moment. Father Gray, who had already stood up, was also filled with shock. Although he had already guessed that it was Viscount Ferguson when he heard the shout and the green blade of wind, he still couldn't help but be surprised when he saw him appear in front of him. You did well. Viscount Ferguson nodded at Gray and Caroline before walking towards the burly man who was paralyzed on the ground. Gray only now noticed that there was another figure behind Viscount Fergus. He also had a head full of golden hair, but he wore a black riding attire. Although his face was similar, he was much younger. It was Bernal. Big brother. Bernal, Gray called out with a slightly dazed expression. He originally thought that all of this was Bernal's plan, but what was going on now? Chapter 25. Are you all right? Bernal showed his usual warm smile as he greeted Gray. I'm fine. Gray shook his head. When the dagger had been knocked away by the burly man, his right hand had been sprained a little, but it wasn't serious. On the contrary, the thick smell of blood on his body made him very uncomfortable. However, after taking the blood of a blood fiend twice, he had a certain level of resistance to the smell of blood. However, he still didn't understand what was going on. What kind of power was behind the scenes that wanted to kill him? To be able to send out 2 high-ranked blood warriors, their power was definitely not small. At the very least, an average baron's family wouldn't be able to afford 2 high-ranked blood warriors. On the other side, Viscount Fergus had already walked to the burly man's side. "Leiden heck, it really is you." The burly man's figure was too obvious. The moment he saw the burly man, Ferguson had already guessed his identity. "Fergus. Viscount, what a scheme. And that person. He's not an ordinary person either. To actually be able to resist the temptation of a noble title." The burly man was bleeding profusely, and there was a large puddle of blood under him. The soil had already been dyed red. He looked weakly at Viscount Fergus as he spoke. Evidently, he had already figured out why Viscount Fergus would appear here. "Then you can only blame yourselves for finding the wrong person. The Fergus family would never betray their own people," Viscount Fergus said with a cold expression. "Indeed. I didn't expect," the burly man laughed self-mockingly. "Did the Oliver family instruct you to do this?" Viscount Fergus didn't want to discuss this matter any further and directly asked in a cold voice. "No, it's—" The burly man shook his head with difficulty. "Do you think you can fool me? What, you want to take the blame for the Oliver family before you die?" Viscount Fergus snorted coldly, clearly not believing the burly man's words. Cough, cough. "Since you know I'm about to die, then don't waste your energy." The burly man coughed a few times and spat out a few mouthfuls of blood. He grew weaker and weaker until he finally stopped breathing. Windblade was a powerful skill that could only be used after one's strength had reached the level of a ferocious warrior after practicing Windwolf. This was the killing move that Viscount Fergus relied on. Even a ferocious blood warrior could be seriously injured or even killed by this attack, let alone an upper-level blood warrior. "Dead?" Looking at the dead burly man, Gray's face turned pale. Something was churning in his stomach, but he forced it down. This was the first time he had seen someone die in front of him. However, it was the soul of an adult after all. He forced himself to endure, and in the end, he managed to endure it. He shifted his gaze to the side. In order to divert his attention, he thought about the conversation between Viscount Fergus and the burly man. He was quite concerned about the content of their conversation. Firstly, from the burly man's words, the other party seemed to have found a mole in the Fergus family to assist them in completing this assassination. Listening to the two of them, this mole did not become their mole as the burly man had thought. Instead, he reported this matter to Viscount Fergus, and Viscount Fergus took the opportunity to set a trap and lure the burly man and the others out. Gray already had some guesses about the person who had been chosen as the mole. Although he did not understand why it involved a noble title, he had come to hunt because of Bernal's invitation. Therefore, Bernal was definitely the mole. Now that he thought about it, Viscount Fergus had forced him to participate in this hunt. His actions could be said to be rather strange. It turned out that he had such a plan in mind. "I can clearly feel that Bernal has a deep enmity towards me. I just didn't think that he would actually make such a decision at such a crucial moment." Gray's impression of Borel had changed quite a bit. He had originally been on guard against him as the mastermind behind the scenes, but he had suddenly discovered that Borel was not the mastermind behind the scenes. Furthermore, he had actually thwarted an assassination attempt on him. Gray's feelings were inexplicably complicated. Listening to the burly man's words, Bernal and I seem to be involved in a noble title. Could it be that Viscount Fergus intends for me to inherit the title? Gray was surprised by his own conjecture. He had read many books in the library during this period of time, and knew that illegitimate children did not have the right to inherit. If he wanted to pass the title to an illegitimate child, there would definitely be a lot of resistance. he did not think that Viscount Fergus would actually intend to do so. Putting aside whether or not Viscount Fergus intends to pass the title to me, why would the Oliver family target me? He could not come to a conclusion about the title for the time being, so Grey did not think too much about it for now. In fact, he had never considered inheriting the title. He was thinking about the mastermind behind the scenes he had heard from the two of them. Is it because the Oliver family has an old enmity with the Fergus family, or is it because of some other reason? Moreover, why would the assassination attempt be on me, an illegitimate child, and not Bernal, the first successor to the title? Grey thought hard. My greatest advantage over Bernal is probably my talent for cultivation. In other words, the Oliver family is targeting me because of my talent for cultivation. It's very likely that the Oliver family does not want me to mature, and is preparing to kill me before I can mature? But is the reason really so simple? Although he had already guessed the reason why the Oliver family wanted to assassinate him, Grey felt that it was not that simple. He kept feeling that there was a deeper reason, but with the amount of information he had, it was not enough to make a judgment. He looked at Bernal and asked, "Brother Bernal, what kind of family is the Oliver family?" "The Oliver family is a Viscount family in the east of our territory. Like us, they were also infeft by the Sidney Marquis family." Bernal looked at Grey with a complicated expression and explained. "This man is a lord infeft by the Oliver family. That's why Father is certain that the Oliver family is behind the assassination attempt." "Is the relationship between our family and the Oliver family very bad?" Grey asked with a frown. "It's not good or bad. The various families often work together, but they are also often enemies. This is very common among noble families." Bernal nodded and then shook his head. I see. Grey did not fully understand, but he could roughly understand the meaning. The relationship between nobles was sometimes close, but sometimes it was as if they were mortal enemies. Everything was driven by benefits, so it was very difficult to come to a conclusion about the relationship between two noble families. However, with the information he had, it was still not enough for him to determine the deeper reason why the Oliver family wanted to assassinate him. Rustle, rustle, rustle. Following the sound of bushes being pulled apart, a man with a small mustache walked over. When he saw Viscount Fergus, he bowed respectfully and greeted him. "Lord Viscount." This man was Lord Lind, who had been stopped by a high-ranked blood warrior. He was not surprised by Viscount Fergus's appearance. Evidently, he had already heard of the plan. Viscount Fergus nodded slightly and asked, "He escaped?" "Yes." After hearing the sounds of fighting here, he turned and fled. "I was unable to stop him," Lord Lind replied, and then his gaze turned to the corpse of the burly man beside him. "It really is Leiden Heck." He quickly recognized the burly man's identity and turned to the Viscount, asking, "What's the matter?" "Lord Viscount, how should we deal with this matter?" "Tell all the families in the fief to gather at the castle tomorrow, and follow me to the Oliver family. They actually dared to assassinate a member of the Fergus family. We must make the Oliver family give us an explanation for this." A dangerous aura emanated from Viscount Fergus as he snorted coldly like an enraged lion. "Young Master Grey, Miss Caroline, that's great. You're both fine." Not long after, Sia, who was in the same group as Grey, came over with a large group of guards along with the other nobles. After parting ways with Grey and Caroline and discovering that they weren't being pursued, Sia immediately ran to the rendezvous point outside the shattered stone forest to call for reinforcements to save Grey and Caroline. Hearing her words and knowing that Grey and Caroline were being pursued, all the nobles present were extremely worried. After all, if anything happened to Grey and Caroline, they would definitely be implicated. Thus, they brought their own guards to rescue them without any hesitation. Ian Ricardo, in particular, was extremely worried. He was the one who had initiated this hunt. If anything happened, he would definitely bear the responsibility. "Greetings, Lord Viscount." Someone with sharp eyes saw Viscount Fergus and hurriedly bowed. The others also hurriedly bowed when they saw him. Knowing that Gray and Caroline were being pursued, all their attention was on the two of them. Instead, they didn't immediately notice Viscount Fergus. "Thank you for coming to rescue Gray and Caroline. But don't worry, the assassins have been killed." Fergus restrained the anger on his face, and maintained his usual dignity as he spoke. "It's what we should do," the nobles all said respectfully. Chapter 26. The hunt ended abruptly and an assassination attempt occurred. Even though only 4 of the Fergus family's guards were seriously injured, no one was in the mood to continue hunting. On the other hand, Gray and the others ate many delicious wild animals that night. The hunted animals were brought back and meticulously cooked by the castle's chef. Because these animals were not force-fed, the taste was much more delicious than usual. After dinner, Viscount Fergus called Gray alone to the study. The purple moonlight was outside, and the oil lamp in the study emitted a bright light. Bursts of incense wafted out. There was a small brown round table with 4 brown wooden chairs nearby. At this moment, Viscount Fergus was sitting on one of the chairs, while Gray was sitting on the other. There was a cup of milk tea in front of the two of them, and the servants had already been dismissed. Viscount Fergus took a sip of the milk tea. After putting it down, he looked at Gray and spoke. "You have a lot of questions in your heart, don't you?" "Yes." Gray did not deny it. He did have too many questions. Was Bernal the spy? Why did Viscount Fergus want to pass the title to the original owner of this body and not to his eldest son, Bernal? Why did the Oliver family want to assassinate him? A few days ago, someone found Bernal and bewitched him to lure you out of the castle to assassinate you. However, Bernal was not bewitched by them. Instead, he reported this matter to me, and I formulated a plan to uncover the mastermind, Viscount Fergus said slowly. From his words, he confirmed Gray's previous guess. Bernal was indeed the spy the Oliver family had found. However, the Oliver family did not expect that Bernal was not bewitched. Instead, he reported this matter to Viscount Fergus, and there was a follow-up plan to lure the snake out of its hole, uncovering the mastermind behind the Oliver family. After explaining the general situation, Viscount Fergus asked, "What else do you want to ask? Why is Big Brother Bernal so hostile towards me?" This was a rare opportunity, so Gray decided to ask the question that had been bothering him. He wasn't afraid that Viscount Fergus would be unhappy. Since Viscount Fergus said so, he must have a plan to say it. "Because I'm preparing to pass my title to you, and it should have belonged to him." Without avoiding this rather sharp question, Viscount Fergus looked deeply at Gray and said, "Why? Because you're more suitable than him. You can bring the family to greater heights." A step further? Gray keenly sensed that this word had an unusual meaning. "Yes, go one step further." Viscount Fergus nodded. He did not know if it was an illusion, but Gray seemed to be able to see a trace of passion in his eyes. "The Fergus family is now a Viscount family. If we go one step further, wouldn't it be a Count family?" Gray suddenly recalled that he had once read in a miscellaneous book in the library. In order to prevent the weakening of the overall strength of the kingdom issued a general decree on the enfeoffment and inheritance of titles. There was a hard rule that the title of Count could only be conferred to the rank of Berserker or above. Moreover, if the 3 successive successors of the title in the family did not reach the rank of Berserker, the title would be downgraded. Viscount Fergus's strength clearly had not reached the rank of Berserker, and at his current age, if there was no special opportunity, the possibility of further advancement was not high. And with the talent displayed by the original owner of the body, it was possible to become the first Berserker of the Fergus family. Then, thinking that the Fergus family wanted to pass the title to the original owner of the body, everything made sense. Viscount Fergus wanted to let the strength of the original owner of the body reach the rank of Berserker, and through accumulating military merits, Let the family go one step further and push the family to the position of count. There's actually such a reason, the reason for Bernal's enmity towards the original owner of the body, and the reason why Viscount Fergus wanted to pass the title to the original owner of the body, had already been clarified. Of course, the one in this body was no longer the original youth, and he had not thought about whether or not he wanted to inherit the title. At least, he did not want to consider this question for the time being. Grey asked another question that he urgently wanted to know. Then why does the Oliver family want to assassinate me? Because of the fight for the title of Count. Fight for the title of Count? Grey's face was full of shock, understanding, puzzlement, and doubt. He suddenly understood why the Oliver family deliberately wanted to kill him. It turned out that the original owner of the body was actually involved in the fight for the title of Count between the two families. He did not understand why the Fergus family and the Oliver family would have a fight for the title of Count. Wasn't the title of Count awarded according to military merits? The two families were both Viscounts of the Marquis family of Sydney. They should not be able to fight for the title of Count, right? Without rushing to answer Grey's question, Viscount Fergus asked instead. Do you know how many Counts and Viscounts there are in total in the Marquis of Sydney? 2 Counts and 6 Viscounts. This was what Grey asked Caroline on the way back after the assassination attempt today. The 2 Count families were the Smalley family and the Ford family. The Viscount families were the 6 families including the Fergus family. The Fergus family, the Oliver family, the Richens family, the Shelley family, the Rock family, and the Bessemer family. Then do you know how many Counts a Marquis family can have? Viscount Fergus continued to ask. 3. After saying this, Grey's face froze for a moment. Then, he revealed a look of realization. He finally understood why the Fergus family and the Oliver family had a fight for the title of Count. Yes, there is only 1 Count left, but there are 6 Viscounts. Do you think the Oliver family wants to see you grow? Viscount Fergus said with a smile. No. Grey shook his head. He finally understood why the Fergus family and the Oliver family had fought so fiercely, to the point that even their lords had died in battle. It was all for the sole remaining Count's position. If he could not kill the other side's descendant with the potential to become a berserker, and let the other side cultivate a berserker first, then even if his own family cultivated a berserker later, it would be useless. No wonder the Oliver family tried to assassinate him. All right, I've told you everything you need to know. Come with me to the Oliver family tomorrow. We must make the Oliver family give us an explanation for this assassination. Otherwise, similar assassinations will continue. Viscount Fergus clearly wanted to kill the Oliver family as an example to others. On top of a steep hill, a majestic green-gray castle stood. 3 sides were steep cliff. The only side that could be passed through was a tall and sturdy wall and an arrow tower. This was the Oliver family's castle. The Purple Moon Kingdom had a lot of hills. There were many similar steep hills in the kingdom. Therefore, most of the Purple Moon Kingdom's noble castles were built on steep hills. It was very easy to defend and hard to attack. A man with a pair of brown-yellow eyes wearing a green battle suit hurriedly entered the Oliver family and was led to an elegantly decorated living room. The room was decorated elegantly and had a noble taste. There were carvings, murals, and runic lamps. Every item was expensive, but the man in the green battle suit was not in the mood to appreciate them. Instead, he had an anxious look on his face. He was the high-ranked blood warrior who had fought with Lord Lynn today. He had heard the commotion on Viscount Fergus' side and fled. Asterisk clap clap clap. Asterisk the sound of footsteps approached, and a brown-haired man in purple noble robes walked over. The man had a brown beard and an ordinary face. He was not very tall, but he stood upright and gave off a dignified feeling. Lord Viscount. Seeing the brown-haired man, the man in the green battle suit hurriedly stood up and bowed. The brown-haired man was Viscount Oliver Waters Oliver. Why are you the only one back? Where's Leighton? Seeing that the man in the green battle suit was alone, Waters frowned slightly and asked, "My lord, we failed. We fell into Viscount Fergus's trap. Leighton is most likely dead." The man in the green battle suit had an ugly expression. Fell into Viscount Fergus's trap? Waters raised his eyebrows slightly. Yes, Viscount Fergus suddenly appeared in the middle of the assassination. Although I did not see him in person, judging from the commotion of the battle, it should have been him. The man in the green battle suit hurriedly said. "Is there a problem with Bernal's part?" Waters asked as he gestured for the man in the green battle suit to sit down. "That should be the case. We used trustworthy people in all aspects. The only one who might have a problem could only be Bernard, the spy," the man in the green battle suit said with certainty. "Then we underestimated him. To be able to resist the temptation of a noble title, that fellow Emerson is quite lucky. All his children are so outstanding. Bernal is like that, and that bastard called Grey is even more so." Waters sighed slightly. "My lord, what do we do now?" the man in the green battle suit asked with a serious expression. This time, the Oliver family had assassinated a member of the Fergus family and was even discovered by the Fergus family. A territorial war was probably unavoidable. Inform all the nobles in the territory to gather the troops at the castle tomorrow. It won't be easy to quell Emerson's anger this time. Waters leaned on his arm as he pondered. "Yes, I'll go inform them now." Chapter 27. The next morning, more than 300 cavalrymen gathered outside of Viscount Fergus's castle. Their neat formation and their temperament, which had been baptized by the battlefield, made them appear majestic and imposing. At the front of the 300 cavalrymen were 16 men in battle attire. Some of them were middle-aged, while others were young. These were the 2 barons, 6 lords, and their heirs. Lord Linda was in charge of the castle's defense, so he wasn't present. Viscount Fergus rode his crimson horse, which was as fast as a blood fiend, towards this group of people. Behind him, Grey, Bernal, and Elise were all in battle attire and riding their horses. This territorial battle was an opportunity for actual combat, so Viscount Fergus brought along Grey and the other 2, with the exception of Caroline. Although women could also practice blood techniques, they would rarely follow their masters into battle. Those who did follow their masters into battle were usually people with outstanding talent. Viscount Fergus obviously didn't think that Caroline was such an outstanding talent, so he didn't plan to nurture Caroline's battle experience. "Greetings, Lord Viscount." Seeing the arrival of Viscount Fergus and the rest, the 16 men in battle attire at the front of the 300 cavalrymen all dismounted from their horses. They held the reins in their left hands and placed their right hands in front of their chests. They bowed to Viscount Fergus. Not bad. Let's go." Viscount Fergus sized up the 16 men, especially the young faces. He nodded in satisfaction when he saw that these people were full of fighting spirit and didn't seem to be uneasy about going to the battlefield. The 16 men mounted their horses and the entire group moved in unison. Dust and dirt flew backwards like yellow smoke. The horses galloped like an unstoppable flood towards the east of the territory. That was the direction of Viscount Oliver's territory. Grey rode on the black warhorse he had ridden before. Now, this horse had become his personal horse, but of course, it was only temporary. According to his agreement with Viscount Fergus, once his strength reached the level of a middle-rank blood warrior in 2 years, Viscount Fergus would gift him a crimson horse that was as fast as a blood fiend. At that time, this horse could be retired. His current cultivation speed was still very fast due to the fact that the transformation had yet to disappear. Up until now, he was able to maintain the first posture for the 3rd time for 8 minutes. In a few more days, he should be able to completely complete the first posture for the 3rd time. Based on this speed, Grey estimated that his strength would increase to that of a middle-rank blood warrior in 3 months. Right now, He was rather hesitant about whether or not he should tell Viscount Fergus about this matter after his strength had risen to middle-level blood warrior. After all, this kind of speed of advancement was really too terrifying, far surpassing the talent that the body's original owner had displayed before. Although he wanted to display his talent so that Viscount Fergus would think highly of him, wouldn't it be too much to show everything? At the same time, he had been thinking about the metamorphosis of his body these past few days. The metamorphosis had appeared because of the blood fiend's blood, so the metamorphosis must be related to the blood fiend's blood. His strength was rapidly approaching that of the Windwolf, which provided the blood fiend's blood. Could he have the ability to absorb the characteristics of other creatures and then use them as a blueprint to reforge his body? Simply put, if he swallowed the blood of other creatures, his body would be able to grow to the same level of strength as the creature in a very short time. Of course, this was only Gray's own conjecture. Whether or not this was the case would require further training to confirm. At the same time, he also wanted to know what would happen if he swallowed the blood of other blood fiends other than the Windwolf. Young Master Bernal, young Master Gray, young Master Elise. A young man dressed in brown battle attire rode his horse towards Gray and the others. The man had light brown hair, a medium build, and a somewhat handsome face. It was Ian Ricardo of the Ricardo family. Riding on their horses, Gray and the other two nodded to the other party. The other party continued to ride his horse and approached Gray's side before opening his mouth to speak. Young Master Gray, I'm truly sorry about yesterday's matter. I didn't think that the hunt I organized would be used by the Oliver family to assassinate you, young Master Gray. Ian had an apologetic expression as he spoke. Big brother Ian, you don't have to blame yourself. Even if you didn't organize this hunt, the Fergus family would still find other opportunities to assassinate me. Gray shook his head. In fact, the most unfortunate person in this matter was probably Ian Ricardo. He had spent a lot of effort to organize a hunt out of goodwill, but in the end, he was met with an unexpected calamity and encountered an assassination attempt. Not only did he not gain any benefits, but he also caused the other nobles to feel some resentment towards him. After all, the assassination attempt happened during the hunt he organized. No matter what, he had a certain degree of responsibility. Many thanks for young Master Gray's understanding. Ian heaved a sigh of relief. If it was before yesterday, he probably wouldn't treat Gray so seriously. But from the fact that the Viscount knew that the mastermind behind the assassination attempt on Gray was the Oliver family and brazenly launched a territorial war against the Oliver family, he could already see that Viscount Fergus valued Gray more than Bernal. The rumor that Viscount Fergus wanted Gray to inherit his title was very likely true. It's fine. In fact, apart from encountering the annoying assassination attempt yesterday, I also had a lot of fun. Gray smiled. This was the truth. This was the first time in both his previous and current lives that he had enjoyed the pleasure of hunting. He inexplicably liked this matter that didn't have a wildlife protection order. You had a lot of fun. It's a pity that I was called over by my father as soon as I arrived at the Stone Slope Forest yesterday. I didn't have a chance to hunt at all. Bernal joked from the side. Then let's have Big Brother Ian organize another one. Because of yesterday's matter, Gray's impression of Bernal had changed quite a bit. Seeing Bernal joking, he couldn't help but smile. Okay, no problem. I'll organize another one when we return this time. Ian also smiled and said, I'm in favor of organizing another one, but please don't attract any more assassins, Bernal said with hidden bitterness. After saying this, the three of them couldn't help but laugh. 3 hours later, the group had already left Viscount Fergus' territory and entered Viscount Oliver's territory. Viscount Fergus' territory wasn't considered small. It was a full 3,000 square kilometers, and the roads were rugged. However, it was still traversed within 3 hours. Not only were there extraordinary creatures like blood fiends in this world, but the endurance and running speed of ordinary horses were also much more valiant than in his previous life. Traveling 1,000 miles in a day was no longer a legend, but a reality. For example, Viscount Fergus' Crimson Blood horse could achieve this, and even surpass it. Da-da-da. After entering Viscount Oliver's territory, the group would occasionally pass by some fields and villages. The group of more than 300 cavalrymen brimmed with killing intent. As they passed by, they kicked up a cloud of dust. The commoners in the fields were so frightened that they threw away their hoes and fled. As for the villages that they passed by, they hid in their simple wooden houses and secretly observed Gray's group through the gaps in the wooden boards. Their gazes were filled with fear, curiosity, surprise, doubt, and worry. As lowly commoners, any action of the nobles that ruled them could bring disaster to them. Just like now, if it was a nobleman with a more vile character, he might have already tortured and killed these commoners in the Oliver family's territory. Fortunately, Viscount Fergus didn't. Although he was unhappy that the Oliver family had tried to assassinate Grey, Viscount Fergus clearly didn't intend to vent his anger on these commoners. The group of cavalrymen passed by the fields and villages, heading towards the central region of Viscount Oliver's territory. However, after half an hour the group was forced to stop. This was because another group had appeared in front of them. This was also a group of cavalrymen. They were slightly more numerous than Gray's group, around 400 people. At the front of this group of cavalrymen, there were more than 10 men in battle attire riding tall horses. They were brimming with killing intent as they looked at Gray's group. The leader was dressed in brown metal battle attire. His face was ordinary, and he had a brown beard. He wasn't very tall, but he looked rather capable. He was sitting on a horse with pure black hair. Compared to the black horse that Gray was riding, it was longer and taller at the shoulders. Chapter 28. Waters, I thought you would hole up in your castle. Viscount Fergus rode his horse to the front of the group and snorted coldly. Viscount Fergus has graced us with his presence. Of course I have to come out to welcome him. The man in brown armor was the head of the Oliver family, Waters Oliver. He had a faint smile on his face, as if he didn't see the 300 or so ferocious cavalrymen led by Viscount Fergus at all. It was as if they were really here to welcome guests. Waters, put away your hypocrisy. You actually dared to send people to assassinate a member of the Fergus family. This time, you will pay the price for your actions. Viscount Fergus said coldly. Assassinate? I think you're mistaken. The Oliver family has never sent people to assassinate a member of the Fergus family. Waters had an innocent expression. Then how do you explain Leidenhecht? Viscount Fergus snorted coldly. That's his personal behavior. It has nothing to do with the Oliver family. Waters said, trying to distance himself from the matter. Although many noble families did assassinate members of other families with potential, they would never admit it. This was because noble law did not allow it. Humph, do you think I'll believe such words? Viscount Fergus's expression was cold. I know it's hard to convince you, but that's the truth. If you don't believe me, there's nothing I can do. A trace of ridicule appeared at the corner of Waters's mouth. On the contrary, I want to remind you. Is it really good to start a territorial war so lightly? After this battle, the strength of both our sides will definitely be damaged, and the strength of the other 4 viscounts will probably surpass ours. I know that even if you don't say it. However, there's your Oliver family this time. Next time, there will be the Richens family, the Shelley family. Viscount Fergus's eyes were cold. If I don't do something, you'll really think the Fergus family is easy to bully. Looks like you're determined to start a territory war. Very well, let's see if your Wind Wolf blood technique or my Fire Lizard blood technique is stronger. Waters withdrew the smile on his face, and his expression turned completely cold. His gaze met Viscount Fergus' gaze, and there seemed to be invisible lightning flashing in the air. Tap, tap, tap. Almost at the same time, 2 warhorses, one red and one black, galloped towards each other. The terrifying burst of speed was like two streaks of light rapidly approaching each other. The speed of the two horses was actually about the same. The black warhorse that Waters was riding was actually a precious warhorse that was comparable to a piercing blood horse. Crack! Both of them drew their weapons. Viscount Fergus held a cyan longsword in his hand, while Waters held a fiery red machete. Clang! The two weapons, one green and one red, collided together, and a terrifying sound effect spread out from the center of the collision. Pa pa pa! Hit by the terrifying impact, the two warhorses could not help but take a few steps back, leaving a few deep and shallow hoofprints on the ground. But in the next moment, under the urging of the two, they closed in on each other. Fortunately, the two warhorses were not ordinary warhorses. If they had been ordinary warhorses, even if they did not die on the spot, their legs would have been broken. Clang! 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 Cold light flashed, and in a few moments, the two had already exchanged more than 10 blows. Either you attack and I block, or I attack and you block. Every time the two made a move, there would be a terrifying sound in the air. The power and speed of the two's attacks surpassed the martial arts masters in Gray's previous life, and the limits of the human body in his previous life. If a martial arts master from his previous life appeared in front of these two, he might not even be able to block one of their attacks. Charge, kill. When Viscount Fergus and Waters charged towards the other side, the cavalry behind them also charged forward. Like two torrents, they charged towards the other side. Gray, Ellis, and Bernal were also among the charging troop. Only, there were people wearing battle armor faintly circling around them. Clearly, this was to protect them. Clang, clang, clang. The two torrents collided, and the sound of weapons clashing could be heard. At the same time, there was the muffled sound of flesh being struck. From time to time, people would fall from their warhorses, their bright red blood spilling onto the ground, dyeing the world red. Kill. Before Gray could recover from this shocking scene, an enemy cavalry was already charging at him. Swish. This cavalry was riding a yellow and white horse and wearing leather armor. He wielded a spear with a wooden handle and an iron spearhead, and he thrust it at Gray. The people protecting Gray's group had intentionally let him in, with the goal of training Gray's combat skills. Seeing the spear coming at him, Gray inexplicably felt his blood boil. He had inherited the fighting talent of his body's original owner, and at this moment, he was active again, clearly stimulated by the atmosphere of battle. He pulled out the weapon hanging on his horse with a swish. It was a long sword about 1.5 meters long, the color of white iron. Viscount Fergus had given it to him before leaving the castle. Like him, Elise had also been given such a longsword, which should be some kind of standard weapon. Swish! As the spear came at him, Gray's longsword swept out diagonally, chopping at the wooden shaft behind the spearhead, and then easily cutting the spear in two. Even if it was a standard weapon, given by Viscount Fergus, it must be the best of the standard weapons. It was indescribably sharp, and one slash was enough to cut through a sturdy wooden handle. Then, his long sword did not stop, sweeping at the cavalry who only had the handle left in his hand, and the long sword directly cut through his neck. Puff! A head flew into the air, spinning a few rounds in the air before falling down. It smashed into a cavalry, fell from his body onto the horse, and finally fell to the ground. Coincidentally, the horse stepped on its face, and it was immediately badly mutilated. Blood spurted out from the neck of the headless torso, splattering more than a meter high. Then, the entire torso went limp, no longer having the strength to sit on the saddle, and tilted down, falling to the ground. As for the horse that had lost its master, it was affected by the atmosphere of the battlefield, panicking and rampaging, and was directly stabbed to death by a cavalry with a spear. Gray's face turned white in an instant. Such a scene was too shocking. Just like yesterday, his stomach started to churn again. However, after all, he had already experienced it once, and had a certain degree of adaptability. In addition, his fighting talent gave him an extremely strong immunity to this kind of bloody battle, so his face only turned pale. Another enemy cavalry was released, and charged towards him. He did not hesitate to ride his horse to meet it. After the same set of movements, another head flew into the air. The strength of a low-level blood warrior had a crushing advantage when facing ordinary cavalry. It should be known that when the original owner of this body had just arrived at the castle, he had already completed the magnificent feat of 1 against 5. Even if he did not have much experience in horse battles, it was impossible for him to lose in a one-on-one battle. Slowly, with the help of his fighting talent, he adapted to this kind of atmosphere. The churning in his stomach had long since disappeared, and he even understood how to kill his opponent in the most effortless way. His long sword gently swept across the opponent's neck. The neck did not fly up, but the person was already dead. On the other side, Elise had the same experience as him. She had also purposely let a cavalry enter for him to practice his skills. However, he obviously did not have Gray's fighting talent, and it took him a lot of effort to kill this cavalry. When he saw the bloody scene after the cavalry's death, he failed to live up to his expectations and vomited. The difference between the two of them was obvious. Moreover, Gray's performance could be said to be extremely stunning. This could be seen from the looks of surprise on the faces of the people protecting Gray and the other two. When they first entered the battlefield, although most of their performances were slightly better than Elise's, they definitely did not reach Gray's level. The others' fighting skills were improving at a terrifying speed, and they could not help but feel a wave of fear when they saw them. Fortunately, this person was a friend and not an enemy. If such a combat genius had appeared among the enemy, they would definitely strangle him in the cradle at all costs. Of course, among Gray and the other two, the one who performed the best was not Gray, but Bernal. The other's expression did not change at all when he killed someone, as if he was already used to it. Obviously, Gray's previous guess was correct. Bernal should have already had experience in killing people before this, and most likely had killed quite a number of people. Otherwise, he would not have been so unperturbed. Chapter 29. Puff, puff, puff. With a sweep of the green longsword, the cavalrymen, men, and even their horses were all sliced into 2 halves. The leather armor on their bodies did not protect them at all. Under the green sword, they were cut in half like rotten wood. Puff, puff, puff. The fiery red long saber was swung, and the cavalrymen were cut into halves one after another. Their leather armors were like paper. In the chaotic battle, the real focus was not on the battle between Gray and the rest. It was on the battle between Viscount Fergus and Waters. The two of them were rampaging in the chaotic battle. Other than the two of them, no one else was a match for them. No one dared to get close to them. Anyone who tried to attack them was easily killed with a sword or a sword. The place where the two of them were fighting even became a vacuum. As long as the two of them appeared, both sides would immediately give up fighting and hide. The two of them were like meat grinders on the battlefield. Wherever they moved, there would be a vacuum. The two of them exchanged blows repeatedly and were basically evenly matched. So far, neither of them had gained the upper hand. Huff! Suddenly, Waters, who was in the middle of the battle, shouted. He took a deep breath and exhaled. Huff! A shocking scene appeared. What he exhaled from his mouth was not gas, but a ball of orange flame. The orange flame was the size of a basketball. The flame twisted and jumped on top of the ball. It made people's eyelids twitch. Everyone knew the temperature of the flame. Even the blood warrior's strong body would not dare to take the flame head-on. Moreover, this ball of flame was obviously not an ordinary flame. As the flame was spat out, it was aimed at Viscount Fergus. For the first time, Viscount Fergus's face looked serious. He urged the crimson blood horse to dodge to the side. Sizzle! The flame brushed past the crimson blood horse. Even if it was not hit, the red hair on the crimson blood horse curled up and turned gray. It was burned by the high temperature. Rumble. Viscount Fergus was able to use the speed of his crimson blood horse to dodge, but the other cavalrymen couldn't do the same. 5 cavalrymen who were right behind Viscount Fergus, 3 from the Fergus family, and 2 from the Oliver family, suffered. The flames hit one of the cavalrymen and exploded, turning into countless sparks of different sizes that sputtered in all directions. The cavalryman who bore the brunt of the attack was immediately blasted into a bloody mess. Half of his body was gone. As for the other 4 cavalrymen, because they were too close, they were hit by a large amount of sparks. Their bodies were immediately charred black, and they all fell to the ground. Bursts of meat fragrance wafted out, and it seemed that they would not survive. It wasn't just the 5 of them. The other cavalrymen around them were also more or less burned. Even their leather armor couldn't withstand the power of the sputtering sparks. Ha! Riding a horse to avoid Water's flame attack, Viscount Fergus was not to be outdone. He roared and spat. A green wind blade about a meter long appeared. It was like a green blade, and slashed diagonally towards Waters. Although it wasn't as hot as the flames that Waters spat out, it had a terrifying aura. Furthermore, it was faster than the flames that Waters spat out. Seeing the green wind blade coming towards him, Waters' expression changed greatly. He didn't hesitate to steer his horse to the side to dodge. However, the wind blade was simply too fast. It was faster than the flames. Although he was already dodging, he still couldn't completely avoid it. The wind blade slashed across the black warhorse's buttocks, splitting the black warhorse into 2 halves. Not only that, but the wind blade didn't disappear. It slashed behind Waters, splitting 2 cavalrymen who couldn't dodge in time into 2 before completely dissipating. Retreat, retreat! The blood warriors from the Fergus family and the Oliver family all shouted to their own cavalrymen. The power of the two's exchange was simply too strong. If one wasn't careful, they would be caught in the crossfire. It was the kind that couldn't differentiate between friend and foe. So strong, Grey, who was under the protection of a group of nobles, watched this scene in astonishment. Although this wasn't the first time he'd seen it, he still couldn't help but be amazed. The power of the two's attacks was comparable to cannonballs. The 2 of them were practically mobile turret. Moreover, this mobile turret could be said to be extremely mobile. It could go anywhere and was also extremely hidden. It didn't need to bring anything, just one person. If this had been in his previous life, few people would have been able to block such an assassination. Who would have thought that an empty-handed person could be a mobile turret? With his warhorse dead, Waters fell from it rather pathetically. He rolled a few times on the ground before getting up. Emerson! He roared at Viscount Fergus with his sword in hand. His eyes were about to spit fire. He was angry at his own sorry state, and also at the black warhorse that had been slain. He'd spent a total of 5,000 gold coins to purchase this warhorse, which was as fast as a murderous grade blood fiend. This was half a year's income in his territory. Now that it was gone, one could imagine his heartache. Thump, thump, thump. He stomped on the ground, leaving footprints on the ground as he charged towards Viscount Fergus, who was riding on the blood-red warhorse. Humph! Viscount Fergus snorted coldly. He squeezed the belly of his crimson blood horse and charged towards Waters instead of retreating. Whoosh! As he charged forward, Waters slashed with his sword. Since his warhorse had been killed, Waters obviously hated Viscount Fergus's crimson blood horse. He actually aimed his sword at the crimson blood horse that Viscount Fergus was riding. Whoosh! Viscount Fergus was already prepared. He sat on the crimson blood horse and looked down from above. He swung his sword vertically to meet Waters' attack. Clang! The sword and the sword collided, producing a violent sound. Then, a figure was pushed back a few meters before he could stabilize himself. This person was Waters. Waters' attack came entirely from his own strength, but Viscount Fergus' attack contained the impact of the crimson blood horse's gallop. Naturally, it was more powerful. Clang! 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 Viscount Fergus immediately followed up after gaining the upper hand in one strike, launching an endless barrage of attacks at Waters. With the Crimson Blood Horse's speed, he could either go around the back or to the side. Every time, Waters would be in a difficult situation. Whoosh! One time, Waters was unable to dodge in time. He was hit in the chest and was sent flying. Fortunately, Waters was wearing a metal armor that was infused with magical metal. He took the hit head-on. Of course, his whole body was sent flying more than 30 meters away. Bang! He fell to the ground, his chest aching. Waters turned over and got up. His eyes were red because of anger. When he saw Viscount Fergus approaching him again, his eyes were filled with hatred. Arg! He took another deep breath and then exhaled with a puff. Another ball of orange flame the size of a basketball appeared and headed towards Viscount Fergus. He cultivated the blood technique of Fire Lizard, imitating a type of lizard that could breathe fire. The orange flames were the ability he obtained after becoming a ferocious blood warrior, Orange Fire. However, this kind of ability was not something that could be casually used. This kind of ability was more like a killing move. It was powerful, but it also consumed a lot of blood power. Even with the ferocious blood warrior's blood power, he could only use it 2 or 3 times. Similarly, Viscount Fergus' Wind Blade was also in existence like this. Arg! Viscount Fergus was clearly prepared for this situation. He also roared and a green wind blade was spat out. It collided with the orange-yellow flame. Boom! The flame and wind blade collided between Waters and Viscount Fergus, causing a terrifying explosion. The green wind blade shattered like green glass, and the orange flames were like exploding meteorites, sputtering in all directions. The power was more than twice as strong as the flames and wind blade before. Viscount Fergus had already urged the Crimson Blood Horse to gallop back as soon as he spat out the wind blade. Waters also hastily retreated when he saw Viscount Fergus spit out the wind blades. It was obvious that the two of them had expected the power of the explosion to be extraordinary. However, Waters' speed couldn't be compared to the Crimson Blood Horse. He was much closer to the center of the explosion than Viscount Fergus, who was riding a thorn blood horse. Bang bang bang! Wind blades and flame fragments rammed into his body. He subconsciously used his hands to protect his face outside of the armor, but his hands were riddled with wounds. There were scratches from the wind blade and burn marks from the flame. Blood flowed and scorch marks were everywhere. Due to the pain, he did not even know where his sword was. On the other side, Viscount Fergus was not as badly injured as Waters, but he was still affected. The Red Blood Horse had some scratches and burns. Arg! Arg! Viscount Fergus tried to control the Red Blood Horse, which was panicking due to its injuries. He rode forward and rushed towards Waters. When Waters struggled to stand up, he found that a sword was placed on his neck. Chapter 30. Lord Viscount. When they saw Waters fall to the ground, the 3 high-ranking warriors of the Oliver family had already shaken off their opponents and rushed towards Waters, wanting to protect him. Unfortunately, the one closest to Waters was Viscount Fergus. Coupled with the speed of his Crimson Horse, a normal horse couldn't compare to it. Thus, when Viscount Fergus' sword was already at Waters' neck, the 3 of them still couldn't reach him. Viscount Oliver has been captured by me. Stop! Viscount Fergus shouted with his long sword at Waters' neck. As soon as he spoke, not only did the 3 high-ranking blood warriors from the Oliver family stop fighting, even the other cavalrymen stopped fighting one after another. The reason why the Fergus family did this was because it was Viscount Fergus's order. As for the Oliver family, it was because the most important person in the family was captured by the Fergus family, causing them to hesitate in taking action. Both sides retreated, leaving behind corpses on the ground. Blood had long since dyed the ground red. There were corpses of both men and horses. There was no such thing as a bloodless battle. In every battle, there were bound to be casualties and losses. This was also why the nobles didn't want to start a territorial war so easily. Once a war was started, it would be because the conflict had already escalated, just like this time. Waters, it's time to talk about compensation. After stopping the battle, Viscount Fergus looked at Waters again and said coldly, "Don't worry. Tui, kill me if you have the gut." With a long sword at his neck, Waters felt deeply humiliated. Even though he knew that his assassination had been exposed and that the Fergus family was preparing to start a territorial war, he wasn't afraid at all. They were both vicious warriors, and he didn't think that he was inferior to Viscount Fergus. The only thing he didn't expect was that not only had he been defeated, he had been captured alive. Originally, he thought that even if he was at a disadvantage, he would still be able to protect himself. As vicious warriors, they all had special methods. It was very difficult to kill or capture someone alive. Kill you? I don't dare to kill you. I will only invite you to my territory as a guest and wait for Marquis Sidney to make the decision. Viscount Fergus sneered. I'll make a trip to Oliver Castle while I'm at it. Nobles couldn't be killed at will. Even if a noble made a mistake, they had to be punished by a higher noble, which was the Sidney Marquis family that divided the Fergus family and the Olivier family. Only this family had the right to punish the Olivier family. Of course, the nobles here referred to the families that were directly infeft by the Sidney family. Lord Leighton Heck, whom Viscount Fergus had killed yesterday, was an exception. Only the Olivier family recognized him as a noble. The Sidney family would not recognize him as a noble, and the Fergus family was the same. Killing him was like killing a commoner. As for the trip to Oliver's castle, it was obviously meant to plunder Oliver's castle. Hearing Viscount Fergus's words, Waters' expression immediately changed. Being invited to another noble's territory as a guest was a huge loss of face. From then on, the Olivier family would probably become a laughingstock in the circle of nobles. Assassinating a member of the Fergus family was already unreasonable. In the end, they were even captured and imprisoned. It was like stretching out their faces for others to slap. For nobles who always valued their reputation, this was a huge humiliation. He didn't dare to let the Fergus family head to the Olivier family's castle. If the Fergus family visited, who knew what would happen to the Olivier family? Say it, what compensation do you want? With a face full of humiliation, Waters opened his mouth. First, 50,000 gold coins as compensation. Viscount Fergus had clearly thought of the compensation terms long ago. Hearing Waters' question, he immediately said, although they had already determined that the mastermind behind the assassination was the Olivier family, they didn't have any concrete evidence. Even if they reported it to the Sidney Marquis family, it wouldn't be of much use. Therefore, Viscount Fergus had already planned to make the Olivier family bleed. Impossible. Waters immediately rejected it. If it wasn't for the sword on his neck, Waters would have flown into a rage. After his Viscount territory was handed over to the Sidney Marquis family, the net income was only 10,000 gold coins a year. Viscount Fergus directly asked for 5 years of net income. One could imagine the rage in his heart. Not a single gold coin less. Viscount Fergus's face was cold as he didn't budge an inch. Otherwise, I'll take it myself. Okay, I agree. After taking a few deep breaths and forcefully suppressing the anger in his heart, Waters agreed. If Viscount Fergus went to take it himself, it wouldn't just be 50,000 gold coins. The Olivier family had existed for more than 100 years and naturally had accumulated a lot of wealth. Second, strip the Hecker family of their title. Okay. Waters readily agreed to this. This was within his expectations. The Olivier family would never admit that they were the mastermind behind the assassination, so they needed someone to take the blame. Obviously, the Hecker family was the most suitable. Third, hand over the Hecker family to the Fergus family. Viscount Fergus continued. Emerson, don't go overboard. Although Leiden Hecker assassinated a member of the Fergus family, it had nothing to do with his family. Hearing this, Waters decisively disagreed. Even before his death, Leiden Heck was unwilling to admit that he had been instructed by the Olivier family. Instead, he insisted that it was his own doing. Only in this way would his family be protected by the Olivier family after his death. Although he would lose his noble title, his treatment would be guaranteed. If Viscount Fergus wanted the Olivier family to hand over the Hecker family, it would obviously make the Olivier family bear the infamy of treachery. If a landed noble died in battle for the Olivier family and his family didn't receive the protection of the Olivier family after his death, what would the other nobles think? Would they still fight for the Olivier family the next time they fought? I want people to know that anyone who dares to assassinate a member of the Fergus family will not only die, but also his family will not be spared by the Fergus family. Viscount Fergus said with a cold smile. Change the condition. I can't agree to this condition. Waters gnashed his teeth. Fine, then change the condition. Viscount Fergus knew that Waters wouldn't agree to such a condition. The reason he proposed such a condition was to intimidate the landed nobles who relied on the Olivier family. He wanted them to know that if they dared to participate in the assassination of a member of the Fergus family, not only would they die, but their family would also suffer. Convert all of the Hecker family's assets into money and compensate the Fergus family. Fine. Waters agreed fiercely and said, This is the last condition. This is the last condition. Otherwise, I'm willing to go with you to the Fergus family. Fine, then these 3 conditions it is. Viscount Fergus nodded in agreement under Voltasa's murderous gaze. He realized that Waters was indeed at the limit of his rage. If he mentioned it again, Waters might rather go to the Fergus family than compensate. Although they could break into the Oliver family's castle and plunder it, the casualties would be extremely high. With a ferocious blood warrior like him leading the team, although they would definitely be able to take down the castle, there wouldn't be many of them left. Hank, take my order and go to the castle to withdraw the money. Viscount Fergus' sword was still pressed against his neck. Waters painfully ordered one of the 3 high-ranked blood warriors. Yes, Lord Viscount. A man with a medium build and a pair of brownish-yellow eyes, dressed in black battle armor, answered the call and left with several people. His name is Hank? Gray's gaze swept over this man a few times. If he wasn't mistaken, this man should be one of the 2 people who tried to assassinate him that day. Although he had changed into black armor, his build and brown eyes were exactly the same as the masked man that day. Gray was almost 100% sure that it was this man. Gray naturally wouldn't let go of someone who tried to assassinate him. If he had the chance in the future, he would definitely kill this person without hesitation. Having killed 5 cavalrymen today, he already had a murderous aura about him. He was no longer so resistant to killing people. Different worlds naturally had different ways of doing things. If this was the peaceful world of his previous life, he naturally wouldn't think this way. However, this world wasn't peaceful and didn't have the perfect laws of his previous life. The rules of doing things were naturally different. An hour later, Gray's group had already received a large sum of compensation. They carried the dead cavalrymen on their horses and left the Olivier family's territory. There were more than 300 people when they came, but less than 300 left. A total of 78 people had died in battle. These people were ordinary soldiers, and there weren't any nobles or descendants of nobles. Although there were nobles and descendants of nobles who were injured, they didn't die because they had the protection of their armor. In such a small-scale battle, the Blood Warrior's ability to survive was extremely strong. This was especially so for people like Gray's group, who were heavily protected by the Blood Warriors. It would be difficult for them to die even if they wanted to. Nobles cultivated powerful blood techniques and wore armor with powerful defense. Their ability to survive was extremely strong. In such a battle, it was very rare for them to die. In contrast to Gray's group, the Olivier family had lost more than 100 people, which was a few dozen more than Gray's group. Chapter 31. Only in the afternoon did Gray and his group return to the castle with about 200 men. After settling down the corpses of the dead, the nobles who participated in the battle were rewarded according to the number of enemies they killed. Among them, the Kiplin family received the most rewards. They received a total of 1,500 gold coins. This was another baron family in the territory other than the Ricardo family. The people of this baron family were not good at socializing, but the nobles and soldiers of the family were all good at fighting. They could be said to be the best generals among the nobles of the Fergus family. In this battle, the Kiplin family killed 57 enemy cavalrymen. Other than the Fergus family, they killed the most enemy cavalrymen. Next was the Ricardo family. They killed 35 enemy cavalrymen and received a reward of 1,000 gold coins. After that, the other 6 baron families each received between 300 and 500 gold coins. Including the rewards for the cavalrymen of the Fergus family and the compensation for those who died in battle, the Fergus family spent a total of 5,000 gold coins on this reward. This was almost equivalent to half a year of the Fergus family's tax income. With 50,000 gold coins and the compensation of the Heck family's assets, the Fergus family was now rich and imposing. Naturally, they would not mistreat the nobles and soldiers who participated in the battle. The conversion of the Heck family's assets had not been finalized yet. They had already left people in Viscount Oliver's territory to calculate the amount. The results would probably be out soon. After that, it was time for the celebratory feast. A grand celebratory feast with more than 200 people was held as the night was approaching. The chefs of the castle displayed their exquisite culinary skills. They served exquisite dishes to the nobles and nobles who returned from the battle. The nobles and nobles held transparent crystal glasses filled with red wine and toasted each other, praising each other for today's great victory. Even the normal cavalrymen were able to enjoy some rare delicacies and precious ale that they would not normally be able to eat. In this world where grain production was not developed, wine brewed from grain was very precious. Although they would occasionally think of their fallen comrades, they would only sigh slightly. Death in battle belonged to the cavalrymen. They enjoyed better treatment provided by the nobles than ordinary civilians. What they had to do was to fight for the nobles with their lives. Furthermore, every family member of the cavalry who died in battle would receive a sizable pension. This removed their worries. Although they died in battle, at least their family members would receive a sizable sum of money. Young Master Gray, let me toast you. Young Master Gray, cheers to your heroic performance on the battlefield today. At the celebration banquet, Gray was toasted by a group of nobles. While toasting, they did not forget to flatter Gray. Although there were many exaggerations, Gray's performance today was indeed remarkable. For someone who was on the battlefield for the first time, his performance could be said to be excellent. Of course, with the smooth and slick personalities of the nobles, they naturally would not neglect Bernal and Elise. Bernal's performance was obvious to all. Because it was not his first time in a real battle, his performance was even more outstanding than Gray's. As for Elise, although her performance was barely satisfactory, under the deliberate flattery of these nobles, she immediately blossomed into a smile. Throughout the celebration banquet, Gray had a slight smile on his face. He did not refuse anyone who toasted him. When he was not toasting, he would devour the delicacies on the table to his heart's content. Normally, in order to not appear too abnormal, Gray would do his best to suppress his appetite. Now that there were so many delicacies at this celebration banquet, he might as well eat freely. The celebration banquet only ended late at night. After taking a bath, a refreshed Gray returned to his bedroom, followed by the maid Barbara. Although he drank a lot of wine, he unexpectedly did not feel drunk. He did not have this kind of alcohol tolerance in his previous life. He did not know if it was because this body's alcohol tolerance was higher than ordinary people's, or because of that indescribable transformation. "Brother, you're not hurt, are you?" Pushing open the bedroom door, he saw that the oil lamp was lit. A young girl stood up from the chair next to the desk by the window and trotted over to Gray, carefully sizing him up. The young girl had long black hair that was as smooth as silk, beautiful blue eyes, and wore a light blue dress. It was Sarah. Today's celebration banquet was not suitable for women to attend. She, Madame de Milan, and Caroline did not attend. Although she knew that Gray had returned safely, she did not know the specifics of Gray's situation. "Don't worry, I'm not hurt." Rubbing the young girl's head, Gray revealed a smile on his face. Hearing the young girl's heartfelt worry, Gray could not help but feel warmth in his heart. The feeling of being cared for surfaced in his heart. Because the mastermind behind the assassination attempt on him had been uncovered, he was no longer as wary of the people in the castle as before. Even because Bernal had broken the assassination attempt on him and uncovered the mastermind, his impression of the people in the castle had improved significantly. But the one who truly cared for him the most was still the young girl in front of him. "That's good. When you fight, remember to protect yourself. Remember to be careful. Remember to," after carefully inspecting Gray and confirming that he was not injured, Sarah breathed a sigh of relief, and then began a series of lectures. I know." Gray shrugged and nodded helplessly. He was an adult, and this body was 2 years older than the young girl, but why did it feel like the roles were reversed, as if he was the one being taken care of? "Miss Sarah, don't worry. Young Master Gray is very powerful. I heard from the other servants that young Master Gray killed 5 enemies this time. Even the Viscount praised him personally." At the side, the tall and slender Barbara, dressed in black and white maid attire, smiled. "Killed 5 enemies? Even Father praised him personally?" Sarah's face showed surprise and joy. For the people of this world, even for women, when they heard that their companions had killed enemies, the first thing they would think of was not sympathy for the enemy, but happiness for their companion's strength. "I just heard from the servant who served the dishes that many noble children toasted to young Master Gray." Barbara's face was full of joy as she spoke. For her, as Gray's personal maid, the stronger Gray was, the more Viscount Fergus valued him, and the better her position and treatment in the castle would be. It could be said that they were bound together for good or ill. Now that Green was favored by Viscount Fergus, she was naturally extremely happy. Late at night, Viscount Fergus' study was still lit. Viscount Fergus, dressed in his home clothes, was sitting in front of his desk. He seemed to be quietly pondering, but also seemed to be waiting for something. Knock, knock, knock. Gentle knocks sounded on the door. Viscount Fergus glanced at the door and opened his mouth. "Come in." The door to the study was pushed open and a man walked in. The man was wearing a black leather armor inside, and a large black cloak on the outside. The hood of the cloak was not on his head, revealing a pale, beardless face. "Lord Viscount." The man placed his right hand on his chest and bowed to Viscount Fergus. Viscount Fergus nodded. He was not surprised at the man's appearance. Clearly, he already knew that the man would come. "Lord Viscount, you summon me for?" The man carefully observed Viscount Fergus, and maintained a humble attitude as he asked. "Go and exterminate the Heck family," Viscount Fergus said with a cold expression. It was as if he was not talking about exterminating a family, but about killing a chicken or a duck. The Heck family was the lordship's family of the burly man who tried to assassinate Gray. Of course, this family had been stripped of their lordship by the Oliver family due to the Fergus family's request. "Yes," the beardless man replied respectfully, then turned and opened the study door to leave. The Oliver family had assassins who specialized in doing dirty work for them. As a Viscount family, the Fergus family naturally had one as well. Although the Heck family had been stripped of their title, Viscount Fergus clearly did not let this family off. Chapter 32. Did the Oliver family lose in the end? Waters was captured on the spot, and even compensated with 50,000 gold coins? The Oliver family is regressing more and more. They actually suffered such a crushing defeat. It looks like the Oliver family is destined to have no hope in the fight for the title of Count. Viscount Locke, Dresden Locke, a man with conspicuous gray hair, muttered to himself as he looked at the information sent back by the spies sent to Viscount Oliver's territory. The Fergus family's attitude is very unyielding this time. It looks like the Fergus family really does value this illegitimate child. The assassination plan from before will have to be delayed. Viscount Shirley, Yingo Shirley, a man with an aquiline nose, looked at the information in his hands and narrowed his eyes. Interesting. Let me see if your Fergus family has the qualifications to compete with my Richens family for the title of Count. Viscount Richens, Asa Richens, a handsome man, looked at the information regarding the territorial war between the Fergus family and the Oliver family with a confident expression. The Fergus family is another strong competitor. However, I won't lose in the fight for the title of Count. Viscount Isabel Bessemer, a beautiful woman with black hair, was the only female count of the 6 Viscount families. Her face was filled with confidence that wasn't inferior to a man's. The territorial war between the Fergus family and the Oliver family ended with the Fergus family's victory and the Oliver family's huge compensation. However, the effects of this battle were far from over. The conflict between the two families had intensified, and for a long time in the future, the open and covert struggles between the two families would become abnormally intense. The Oliver family wouldn't take this lying down so easily, while the Fergus family wouldn't let off a family that wanted to assassinate their own family's descendant. The results of this battle were spread to the various influential nobles of the Marquisate through various channels on the same day. Even the noble families that were slightly further away received the news the next morning. It could be seen how much importance the other families attached to this news. A territorial war between two Viscount families was no longer a small matter in the Marquisate. The Rock family, Bessemer family, Shelley family, and Richens family had different opinions regarding this battle. These 4 families, like the Fergus family and the Oliver family, were also involved in the fight for the title of Count. However, there was no doubt that the 4 families' strategies would be adjusted. In comparison, a few days later, it was said that Lord Heck's family had been completely wiped out overnight. Including the servants, more than 30 people were not spared. However, very few families paid attention to it. The nobles who heard this news only laugh indifferently. They were just sacrificial lambs in the fight between the two families. Viscount Fergus's territory, and Viscount Fergus didn't have any plans to involve himself in this matter, of course. And Viscount. He continued to train every day and then lived a life that he envied in his previous life. He wore expensive, high-end clothing and had a beautiful maid by his side at all times to attend to him meticulously. Any of his needs, even his physiological needs, could be satisfied. If not for the fact that this body was still too young, Gray would have been unable to control himself long ago. He enjoyed the delicacies cooked by the castle's exclusive chef every day. A single meal could eat up several months of a commoner's living expenses. Occasionally, he would go to the horse farm next to the castle and gallop around on horseback. If not for the fact that he was worried about being assassinated again, he would occasionally go to the stone forest not far from Fergus City to participate in the hunt and enjoy the thrill of it. This kind of life was too extravagant, at least from the perspective of his previous life. The only thing that made him unhappy was that the crisis was far from over. As long as the Oliver family hadn't been destroyed, the crisis wasn't over. If there was a chance to kill him, the Oliver family wouldn't hesitate to strike again. Moreover, even if the Oliver family was destroyed, there was still the crisis from the other Viscounts' territories. There were a total of 6 Viscount families in the Marquis of Sydney. Excluding the Fergus family and the Oliver family, there were still 4 other families. If these 4 families had the chance, they wouldn't hesitate to get rid of him. In the morning, in the empty space south of the castle where Gray usually trained, Gray spread his legs apart and bent his knees. He was half squatting and his body was bent forward. His two hands were hanging naturally with his palms facing down. His head was raised and his eyes were looking into the distance. He maintained this posture without moving, like a wind wolf waiting for its prey. Inside his body, waves of numbness spread throughout his body, as if there was seawater moving in and out of his body. Every time it moved, the quality of his body would increase slightly. This was the blood of the wind wolf that had been implanted in his body, in conjunction with the blood technique training posture, tempering his body. Sweat was already dripping down from his forehead. This was already the third time he'd practiced the blood technique, and he'd been maintaining this posture for a long time. Time passed second by second. Finally, he moved from his stillness. He stood up and stretched his muscles and bones. Suddenly, his whole body emitted crackling sounds like beans being popped. "I've completed the first training posture of the third time. Next time, I can begin the second training posture." He spoke rather casually, but his words were enough to shock Viscount Fergus and everyone in the castle. It hadn't even been half a month since Viscount Fergus last asked, but he was already able to go from being able to persist for 6 minutes on the first posture for the third time to 10 minutes now, completing the first posture for the third time. This rate of improvement was terrifying. If he continued to practice at this rate, even if he didn't consume the blood of the blood fiends, which was a precious item that could increase the speed of practice, it would take him at most 3 months to complete the third training and raise his strength to that of a middle blood warrior. With the assistance of the blood fiends, this time would undoubtedly be greatly shortened. It should be enough to shorten it to within 2 months. Calculating carefully, it hadn't been more than 20 days since he'd become a lower blood warrior. If there were no accidents, it would take him at most 3 months to cultivate from a lower blood warrior to a middle blood warrior. Gray didn't know how long it took Viscount Fergus to cultivate from a lower blood warrior to a middle blood warrior, but Gray knew how long it took for Bernal to cultivate from a lower blood warrior to a middle blood warrior. 4 years, a full 4 years' time. In other words, his current practice speed was at least 10 times that of Bernal's. One could imagine how terrifying his practice speed was now. "Young Master Gray, please wipe your sweat." Seeing that Gray had stopped practicing, the maid Barbara, who had been waiting in the distance, came forward and respectfully handed him a towel. She was wearing a black and white maid outfit, with a headband wrapped in white cloth on her head. Her skin was fair, and her legs were long and slender. She was one of the most beautiful maids in the castle. Gray wiped the sweat from his forehead and returned the towel to the maid Barbara. He glanced at the open space where he usually practiced. Because it was remote and the castle was too big, it was difficult for the servants to clean every corner of the castle. The stone slab that he smashed with his fist last time hadn't been replaced yet. At the same time, a lot of dust had accumulated on the ground. Every time he practiced, it was inevitable that dust would rise. He frowned slightly and immediately ordered, "Replace this stone slab. Then, get someone to clean this place every day. It's best to replace the stone slab before this afternoon. I still have to practice in the afternoon." "Understood, young Master Gray. I'll have someone inform Butler Nick in a moment and let him make the arrangements." The maid Barbara nodded. With Gray's current importance in the castle, he only needed to say a word and the butler would naturally make the appropriate arrangements. Then, she said in a slightly playful voice, "But, young Master Gray, you might not be able to practice in the afternoon?" After interacting with Gray for so long, she had long discovered that Gray was a very easy person to get along with. Therefore, when it was just her and Gray, she would occasionally speak in such a suspenseful tone. Why? Gray was puzzled. He carefully tried to recall in his mind, but he couldn't recall any special arrangements he had this afternoon. Today is Saturday. In the afternoon, you have to go with Miss Sarah to Fergus City to learn the noble dance from Madame Emma. It was rare to see Gray confused, so Barbara said with a smile. Today is already Saturday? Only then did Gray realize that today was already Saturday. This world was the same as his previous one, with a 7-day work and rest schedule. However, Gray rarely paid attention to the day of the week. In his previous life, he was especially sensitive to the day of the week when he was studying. After all, it was related to holidays. Chapter 33. In the afternoon, a carriage with the insignia of Howling Wolf in the moonlit night drove out of the Fergus family's castle. Around it, there were more than 20 cavalrymen escorting it. The leader of the escorts was a man wearing a coffee-colored battle suit with a goatee. It was Lord Lind, an upper-level blood warrior. In the carriage, there was a young man and a girl slightly younger than the young man. It was Gray and Sarah. Worried that they would encounter assassins again, Viscount Fergus sent Lord Lind to escort Gray and Sarah to the place where they learned to dance. With Lord Lind's upper-level blood warrior strength and more than 20 cavalrymen, even if they encountered an assassination like last time, they would be able to hold on until reinforcements arrived. The carriage drove into Fergus City and finally arrived at a residence surrounded by walls. There were 2 stone sculptures of a tiger and a leopard in front of the door. The owner of the residence was Lord Corgi, Betty Corgi. He was one of the 7 lords of the Fergus family. Although they had their own land, the Corgi family preferred to stay in their residence in Fergus City. They would only stay in their own land for a period of time every autumn when they collected taxes. The carriage stopped in front of the main building of the residence. It was a 2-story building with a pointed roof. It was entirely made of white stone. When they arrived, Gray and Sarah walked down from the carriage. Lord Lind and the others also jumped down from their horses. Young Master Gray, Miss Sarah, Lord Lind, welcome. There were already a few people coming over to greet them. At the head of the group was a beautiful woman. She wore a purple spaghetti strap dress. Her breasts were perky, revealing her fair skin. Behind her, there were people dressed as housekeepers and maids. Greetings, Madame Emma. Gray and the other 2 greeted the woman. The woman was Lord Corgi's wife, Emma Ricardo. She was also Baron Ricardo's sister. She was famous for her aristocratic dance in Viscount Fergus territory. Her aristocratic dance was the best in the entire Viscount Fergus territory. Many aristocratic families liked to send their children to her to learn aristocratic dance. Young Master Gray, Miss Sarah, this way please. Lord Lind was led by a servant to the living room to rest. The other knights were also led to their respective resting rooms. Gray and Sarah followed Lady Emma, and were led to a room with an area of 400 to 500 square meters. The ceiling of the huge hall was made of white stone, while the floor and walls were made of wood. The brown wood had been polished until it was extremely smooth. It should have been coated with a special layer of paint, which made the material appear extremely bright. It was so bright that it could even be used as a mirror. In the corner of the room there was a huge upright piano. It had a brownish-yellow body and black and white keys. Beside it stood a man in a tuxedo. He should be a pianist. In the room, there was also a young girl with light brown hair. Young Master Gray, it's nice to see you again. Seeing Gray, the young girl stepped forward and slightly lifted her skirt with both hands as she bowed to Gray. She was wearing a Norran skirt, which was light green in color. The hem of the skirt reached her knees, revealing a pair of slender, white legs. It was Sia, who had hunted in the same group as Gray back in the Stone Slope Forest. Me too. Gray returned the bow to Sia. He felt slightly apologetic towards this young girl. During the previous hunt, the young girl had also been in danger because of him. He felt quite apologetic. At the same time, he was also curious. Why would she appear here? Logically speaking, with her age, she should have already learned aristocratic dance. Brother, who is this? Sarah looked at Sia curiously. Judging from her tone, she seemed to know her brother, but her brother had never mentioned her before. This is Miss Sia from the Ricardo family. Miss Sia, this is my sister, Sarah. Gray introduced the two of them to each other. Young Master Gray, Miss Sarah, I invited Sia to be your dance partner. Seeing that the conversation between the three of them had ended, Madame Emma explained. Thank you. Thank you, Sister Sia. Understanding the reason for her appearance here, Gray and Sarah thanked Sia. In the following time, Gray and Sarah began to learn aristocratic dance under Egbert's guidance. The entire aristocratic dance was divided into many steps. They then learned step by step, guided step by step. Only when the first step was absolutely standard would they begin to learn the next step. The aristocratic dance in this world was very similar to the European court dance in his previous life. The dance was slow and solemn, with strict dance steps, mannerisms, manners, and dance procedures. Of course, Gray could not tell exactly how similar it was. In his previous life, he was just an ordinary office worker. Naturally, he did not learn European court dance. The reason why he thought it was similar was because he had seen it in some television programs. However, in general, the difficulty was not high. Plus, the original owner of the body had come here to learn a while ago. After a few times, Gray gradually became proficient. Although the movements were not graceful, they were quite standard. Sia, dance for young Master Gray. Apparently, Lady Emma had noticed this change in Gray. She called out to Seattle, who was next to her. Okay, Aunt. Sia responded and walked over to Gray. She was only a body's length away from Gray, almost sticking to him. A stronger fragrance than the last time was emitted from the girl's body and floated into Gray's nose. It made Gray slightly dazed. When Gray came back to his senses, his right hand was unknowingly held by a soft and boneless hand, while his left hand was supporting the girl's shoulder. Separated by the thin fabric of the dress, Gray could clearly feel the soft skin and body temperature under the fabric. An inexplicable respect rose in Gray's body, but Gray forcefully suppressed it. Otherwise, he would make a fool of himself today. Ding ding ding, accompanied by the melodious piano music, under the girl's guidance, Gray began to dance for the first time in both his previous and current lives. Gray's dance steps could only be considered standard. After all, he was still a beginner. However, the girl's aristocratic dance standards were quite high. Under her guidance, Gray was easily immersed in it and danced to the music. At times, it was slow and melodious, like a trickling stream. At times, it was rapid and passionate, like a passionate flame. After the song ended, the two separated and Madame Emma walked forward. Young Master Gray, your aristocratic dance is already quite standard, but it's still a little rusty. I believe that with a few more practice, you should be able to become proficient. It's all thanks to Madame Emma's teachings. Gray expressed his sincere gratitude. It was clear that most of the credit was due to Lady Emma for being able to learn the noble dance so quickly. As the person who was the best dancer among the nobles in the Viscount's territory, her teaching standards could be said to be extremely high. Young Master Gray is too polite. Madame Emma smiled and looked at Sia again. And Sia, your aristocratic dance is getting better and better. After a while, I'm afraid my title as the best aristocratic dancer in the Viscount's territory will be given to you. Aunt, you're joking. Compared to you, I'm still far behind. Sia rolled her eyes. When the sun was setting in the west, Gray and Shara bade farewell to Madame Emma and Sia, got into the carriage, and left Lord Corgy's residence. The carriage traveled on the streets of Fergus City. From time to time, they could see passers-by and stalls on both sides of the street. Through the window of the carriage, Sarah looked outside in high spirits and suggested, "Brother, let's go down and take a walk?" Hearing this suggestion, Gray frowned. After some consideration, he could not help but be moved. After coming to this world for so long, he had never strolled around Fergus City. Every time he passed by, he would either ride a horse or take a carriage, and he would only take a hurried glance. "I'll discuss it with Lord Lind. A moment later, Gray and Shara, who had obtained Lord Lynn's permission, got down from the carriage and stepped onto the street. The two of them were in high spirits, looking around as they walked. Every time they passed by a stall, they would stop and take a few glances. Sometimes they would even spend money to buy some trinkets. In the castle, the two of them had 10 silver coins as pocket money every month. Although it was far from enough to buy things like Bloodfiend's blood, it was more than enough to buy some trinkets of the commoner's class. However, they could clearly feel that the gazes of the people around them were filled with reverence. After all, there were more than 20 cavalrymen following behind them. No matter how one looked at them, they did not look like ordinary people. Thus, they did not dare to bid high prices. On the second floor of a hotel on the street, a girl with purple hair stood quietly by the window. She wore blue battle armor with a red cape on her back. Her long hair was draped behind her back, revealing an exquisite and beautiful face like that of an elf. Her eyes were black and white, giving off an ethereal feeling. Her gaze looked through the window, quietly watching Gray and Sarah on the street. No, to be precise, it was Gray. Asterisk knock knock knock. Asterisk behind her, there was a knock on the door. She did not turn around and only spoke. "Come in." Her voice was cold, but it was as pleasant as the song of a lark. A muscular man in black battle armor pushed open the door and entered. After entering the room, he respectfully bowed to the girl and spoke. "Miss, we've found the ruins." At this moment, Gray's figure had already disappeared outside the window. The girl turned around, her face cold as she spoke in an unquestionable tone. Chapter 34. 2 months later. In an empty space south of Fergus Castle, Gray was half squatting. His hands were hanging by his side, his head was raised to the sky, and his mouth was wide open like a wolf howling at the sky. In his mind, he was visualizing the image of a winged wolf howling at the sky in the moonlit night. The purple moon hung high in the sky, sprinkling down strands of moonlight. The world was bathed in a purple hue. Under the purple brilliance, a winged wolf with green fur all over its body stood on a bare hillside, its eyes emitting a strange dark green color. Looking up at the purple moon in the sky, the wolf opened its mouth, revealing 2 rows of sharp teeth that could easily tear its prey apart. A roar came from its throat, lingering for a long time. In the silent night, the roar spread far and wide. Hearing this sound, the wild rabbits hiding in the caves fled into the depths of the cave. A few goats in the bushes raised their heads alertly, bleating uneasily. After a long time, the image in his mind shattered. The exhausted Gray broke free from his motionless cultivation posture and stood up, panting heavily. Beads of sweat kept sliding down his forehead, but there was an irrepressible smile on his face. The 3rd cycle of the blood technique Wind Wolf was completed. Right before he was exhausted, he had finally completed the 3rd cycle and the 4th posture of Wind Wolf. I should be a middle-level blood warrior now. According to the standards of this continent, if one could cultivate the blood technique twice in a row, it meant that one already had the strength of a low-level blood warrior. If one could cultivate it 3 times in a row, it meant that one already had the strength of a middle-level blood warrior. Obviously, being able to cultivate it 3 times in a row meant that he was a genuine middle-level blood warrior. 2 months, as expected. I really did become a middle-level blood warrior in 2 months. No, if one of the Wind Wolf's blood hadn't been given to Elise as compensation, I'm afraid this time would have been brought forward. Gray's eyes flashed with an indescribable light. Including the previous 20 days, it took him less than 3 months to cultivate from a lower-level blood warrior to a middle-level blood warrior. This speed of improvement could only be described as terrifying. One had to know that the eldest brother of this body, Bernal, had spent a full 4 years to cultivate from a lower-level blood warrior to a middle-level blood warrior. One had spent a full 4 years, while the other had spent less than 3 months. From this, one could see the terrifying speed of his improvement. With this rate of improvement, I should be able to become a high blood warrior or even a ferocious blood warrior very soon. I should have the ability to protect myself. Because he was targeted by a Viscount family like the Oliver family, who had a dispute with the Fergus family, it could be said that Grey didn't have much personal freedom. After coming to this world for more than 3 months, the furthest place he had been, other than the territory of the Oliver family, was the stone slope forest that was more than 10 miles away from the castle. Even so, he had encountered a hair-raising assassination attempt, and had almost thought that he was going to die. Although he could go to Fergus City, such a thing couldn't happen often. If he were to go to Fergus City, he would definitely need Lord Lind and his bodyguard to accompany him. Lord Lind was a lord with a fief, and being a bodyguard was already a great injustice to him. If he were to constantly trouble him, even if he didn't complain, Grey would feel bad. Therefore, if he wanted to be free, the only way was to increase his own strength. It doesn't need to be too high. I only need to raise my strength to a high blood warrior, and I should have the ability to protect myself to a certain extent. In order to have the ability to protect himself and eliminate the threat of assassination, Grey had to at least have the strength of a high blood warrior. Only with this kind of strength would he be able to protect himself during an assassination attempt. His greatest danger now came from the other 5 Viscount families, and among these 5 Viscount families, the strongest combat power was naturally the family head, who had the strength of a ferocious blood warrior. However, at this level, they would not easily participate in assassinations. As a family head, they were always the focus of attention of the other families. Their whereabouts were closely monitored, and it was very difficult to shake off surveillance. Therefore, the most likely people to be sent to assassinate Grey were the second level of strength in the Viscount families, which was the strength of a high blood warrior. The assassination attempt in the Stone Slope Forest had been like this. In the face of a high blood warrior, Grey only needed to have the strength of a high blood warrior to be able to resolve the crisis. Even if he wasn't a match for them, as long as there weren't too many high blood warriors, he should have the ability to escape. After all, the blood technique Wind Wolf that he cultivated not only allowed him to gain the ability Wind Blade after cultivating to a ferocious blood warrior, but also had speed as its forte. High blood warrior? With my current cultivation speed, I wonder how long it will take for me to become a high blood warrior? The difference between a middle blood warrior and a high blood warrior, apart from the thickness of the blood power in their bodies, was the number of times they could cultivate the blood technique in succession. A middle blood warrior could cultivate the blood technique 3 times in succession, while a high blood warrior could cultivate the blood technique 4 times in succession. Just like a middle blood warrior and a low blood warrior, there was also a difference of 1 cycle between a high blood warrior and a middle blood warrior. It was the same difference of 1 cycle, but the time it would take would definitely exceed the time it took to advance from a low blood warrior to a middle blood warrior. After all, the further one cultivated, the more difficult it was to progress. In the end, it was very likely that the slightest bit of progress would require several months of hard work. Therefore, according to his estimation, the time it would take for him to cultivate from a middle blood warrior to a high blood warrior would definitely exceed 3 months, even with that inexplicable metamorphosis that helped increase his strength. In fact, it was precisely because of that inexplicable metamorphosis that his strength could increase so quickly. If it hadn't been for that inexplicable metamorphosis, although the speed of his strength increase would surpass Bernal's, it would definitely not be more than 10 times as fast as it was now. 4 months, or perhaps 6 months? Grey raised his eyebrows slightly as he guessed. According to his guess, the longest it would take would not exceed 6 months, and the shortest would be around 4 months. It took him close to 3 months to advance from a low blood warrior to a middle blood warrior. If the time needed to advance from a middle blood warrior to a high blood warrior did not exceed that by much, it should be 4 months. If it exceeded that by much, it should not exceed 6 months. After all, 6 months was more than twice the time it took to advance from a low blood warrior to a middle blood warrior. 6 months, which is also half a year. It looks like I'll have some ability to protect myself after half a year at most, unless I mobilize the ferocious blood warriors or a large number of high blood warriors. However, both of these are unlikely. The ferocious blood warriors were closely monitored by the various families, and a large number of high blood warriors were not available. Currently, the Fergus family had a total of 5 high blood warriors, the Oliver family had 4 high blood warriors, and the other Viscount families had more or less, but the difference should not be too great. After ending his cultivation and taking his usual bath, Gray headed for the library. In the library, Caroline, dressed in a long purple corset dress, sat at a white round table, quietly reading a book with a brown cover. Some of her soft brown hair slid down the long white table. This scene gave off an indescribable feeling of tranquility. "Sister Caroline." Gray greeted the other party. The other party's gaze moved away from the book to look at Gray, and she nodded slightly at Gray. Her right hand stroked her long brown hair, tucking it behind her ear. Her movements were extremely elegant. After greeting her, Gray walked to the third row of bookshelves, which was the bookshelf where all sorts of books were stored. His gaze swept over the names on the spines of these books, and he randomly picked up a book that he had not read before. Over the past 3 months, he had read all the books that he was interested in the library. He could no longer find a book that could deeply attract him just by its title. It could not be helped. There were only 1,000 or so books in the library. Books that attracted him just by their titles would eventually be finished. Therefore, when he read books now, he no longer judged his preferences based on their titles. Instead, he looked at whether he had read the book before. As long as he had not read it, he would pick it up and give it a try. The book he took out was a book called Joseph's Travels. From the name, it should be a book that recorded the experiences of this person called Joseph on his travels on the continent. Pulling out a chair beside the white round table, Gray sat down. Beside him, Barbara poured him a cup of milk tea. The rich fragrance wafted into his nose. In this atmosphere, he flipped open the book. This book was a handwritten copy. In other words, the entire book was handwritten and not printed. Although printing technology existed in this world, it was not developed. This was also the reason why books in this world were so precious. Checked into a hotel in a certain place and ate a certain meal. On a street in a certain city, spent several gold coins to buy a precious red sandalwood sculpture. However, it turned out that he had been cheated. That was not the red sandalwood that had the effect of repelling insects. It was merely the most ordinary red sandalwood sculpture. On the way to a certain place, met a certain acquaintance. Flipping through page after page, Gray could not help but frown slightly. The records in the book were all extremely trivial matters. It was simply like a diary written by an insignificant person in his previous world. It recorded every detail of life. There was nothing interesting about it. It was boring and dry, making it difficult for one to have the desire to continue reading. Gulp, gulp, picking up the cup of milk tea, Gray took a big gulp. Immediately, his mouth was filled with the rich taste of milk tea. Because of the sugar, there was still a faint sweetness. After serving Gray for more than 3 months, Barbara was very familiar with Gray's taste. She knew that Gray liked to drink sweeter things. The rich taste of the milk tea calmed Gray's mood a little. He continued to flip through the pages. Page after page, when he flipped through half of the book, Gray's eyes suddenly widened. He stared in disbelief at one of the many sentences on this page.